The morning Declan Vale opened his eyes in a hospital bed, he had no idea the woman standing beside him, wearing worn shoes and a faded uniform, was the only reason he had survived emotionally intact. Not because she saved his life, but because she had saved something in him long before the accident ever happened. He looked at her face, searched every corner of it, and felt absolutely nothing. She asked him a question so quiet it nearly disappeared into the beeping machines. "Do you remember me?" He didn't. And that single moment of forgetting, from a billionaire who could remember every contract, every acquisition, every stock figure, was about to unravel a truth that would change both of their lives completely. If this story already has you curious, stay with me until the end. Hit the like button, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The thing about summer light in Harlow County is that it lies. It comes in bright and generous through the windshield, all gold and warmth, convincing you that the road ahead is clear, that the afternoon is yours, that the world is exactly as manageable as it looks from the driver's seat of a car that costs more than most people make in a decade. Declan Vale had been driving that road for 16 minutes. He knew the time exactly because he had been watching the clock on the dashboard, a habit from years of back-to-back meetings, of time carved into 15-minute blocks, of a life so structured that even a Tuesday afternoon drive to pick up his daughter from summer camp had been scheduled between a 4:30 call with his Singapore team and a 6 o'clock video conference with the board. Maisie's camp ended at 5. He had 47 minutes. He was making good time. The radio was playing something he didn't recognize, something Maisie had programmed the week before, some song she loved that he kept meaning to ask about, but always forgot. The window was cracked 2 inches, the warm air moving through the gap, and for once, just for a few minutes, Declan Vale was not thinking about quarterly projections or server capacity or the lawsuit his legal team had been managing since March. He was just driving. He almost didn't see the truck, not because he was distracted, not because he was on his phone, but because the truck driver, a man named Carl Tesaro, 49 years old, hauling freight for a discount logistics company that had been cutting sleep requirement hours for years, had fallen asleep behind the wheel, and his 18-wheeler drifted across the center line with the slow, terrible certainty of something inevitable. Declan saw it at the last second. He had time to think, "That's wrong," and time to jerk the wheel hard to the right, and that was all. The impact was not dramatic in the way movies make collisions look dramatic. There was no slow motion, no floating sensation. The sound was enormous, a compression of metal and glass and force that the body registers before the brain does. And then there was just darkness, and the faint smell of something burning, and the radio still playing that song Maisie loved. He woke up 4 days later. Not all at once. It came in fragments, a ceiling tile, the weight of a blanket, the mechanical rhythm of machines beside his head. Pain came before consciousness did, spreading from his ribs and his left leg and somewhere deep behind his eyes. His first clear thought was, "Where is Maisie?" His second was, "Why can't I feel my leg?" His third, and this one surprised him, was a question he didn't understand. He had been dreaming, or something like dreaming, of rain. Heavy, sideways rain. The kind that makes the air taste different. A bus shelter with a cracked plastic roof. Secondhand shoes. A girl's face turned away, shoulders hunched, the sound of crying almost swallowed by the weather. He didn't know where the dream had come from. He didn't know whose face it was. He filed it somewhere at the back of his mind and pressed the call button for the nurse. To understand what Declan Vale stood to lose and what he had already lost without knowing it, you need to understand what he had built. Declan Vale Enterprises was not the kind of company that appeared in inspirational magazines with headlines about overnight success. It was 16 years of grinding, of a 22-year-old kid who had inherited a failing software firm from his uncle and made a decision that most people in his position would not have made. He didn't sell it. He stayed. He slept in the office for months. He made decisions that veteran industry people told him were reckless. He hired developers nobody else would hire, bet on infrastructure solutions that the market hadn't asked for yet, and rebuilt the company from a debt-heavy liability into something that by Declan's 32nd birthday had been valued at close to $2 billion. That was the version of the story that appeared in business profiles. What the profiles left out was that Declan had done most of this while raising a child alone. Maisie's mother, Grace, had left when Maisie was 18 months old. It wasn't dramatic. Grace was not a villain. She was a woman who had realized, honestly and painfully, that she was not built for the life she had married into, and she had said so clearly and without cruelty. She signed over full custody, moved to Portland, and built a quieter life for herself. Declan did not hate her for it. He had spent a long time understanding it, but understanding something and being unaffected by it are different things. He had raised Maisie with the help of a full-time nanny named Rosa, who had been with them for 5 years, and later a housekeeper named Bertie, who had unofficially become the most important adult in Maisie's daily life. Declan loved his daughter with a ferocity that embarrassed him sometimes, caught him off guard in the middle of board meetings when she'd text him a picture of a frog she'd found or a drawing she'd made at school. She was 7 now. She had his dark eyes and her mother's stubbornness and an opinion about everything. She was the only reason, in the days following the crash, that Declan tried very hard not to give up. The prognosis was complicated. 3 fractured ribs, a broken left tibia, 2 hairline fractures in his left wrist, internal bruising around his kidney that had required emergency surgery in the first 48 hours, and a head injury, a severe concussion with associated swelling, that his neurologist, Dr. Fenwick, explained with the cautious, measured language of someone who had learned not to make promises. The memory disruption is not unusual given the degree of impact, Dr. Fenwick said on the 3rd day after Declan's waking. He was a careful man, 50s, with reading glasses he wore on a chain around his neck. What we're seeing is retrograde amnesia, which is a somewhat misleading term because it doesn't mean you've lost all your memories. It means certain segments are inaccessible. Some may return spontaneously. Others may require more time, and some— He paused. Some may not return at all. Declan processed this with the same expression he used in board meetings when someone presented bad numbers. What segments? He asked. Primarily from your adolescence, your teens through early 20s, long-term procedural memory, how to do things, appears intact. Your adult professional life is largely accessible, but that particular developmental window— Dr. Fenwick took off his glasses. It's where we're seeing the most significant gaps. Declan spent the rest of that afternoon staring at the ceiling, cataloging what he could and couldn't remember. He remembered college clearly. He remembered his first year at the company. He remembered Grace and the wedding and the drive to the hospital when Maisie was being born. He remembered Maisie clearly, in perfect detail. What he couldn't find, what was simply absent, like a hard drive that had been wiped, was the stretch between ages 14 and 19, his high school years, the town they'd lived in before his family moved, certain friendships, certain places, a bus shelter in the rain, a crying girl in second-hand shoes. He couldn't find her at all. Lena Marlowe came into his room at 7:45 every morning. She was part of the hospital auxiliary staff, a category that covered everything from dietary assistants to cleaning crews to the people who help transport patients between departments. She was not a nurse, though she knew more about patient care than some of the junior staff who wore the title. She had spent the last 4 years at Harlow General, and before that at a smaller facility in the next county, and her knowledge was the accumulated kind, the kind you get from watching, from asking questions, from being the person in the room who was always overlooked and therefore always observing. She was 30 years old. She had dark brown eyes and a way of moving through a room that suggested she had spent most of her life trying to take up as little space as possible. Her uniform was faded at the collar. Her shoes had been resoled once and were getting close to needing it again. She had a silver bracelet on her left wrist that she never took off. Declan noticed the bracelet on the second morning he was conscious enough to notice anything at all. He was lying with his head turned toward the window, watching the gray light of early morning outside, and she came in with his water and adjusted his IV line and checked the supply level of the bags above his bed with the competent efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "You're not a nurse," he said. It came out more blunt than he intended. She didn't flinch. "No." "But you keep checking the IV." "Because I've seen it run low and set off the alarm at 4 a.m., and I'd rather catch it now." She turned to face him. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it. "No." She nodded and moved to refill his water pitcher. "You have a good eye," he said. "I've been doing this for 4 years." Why not nursing school? The question landed wrong. He could see it in the slight pause in her movement, but she answered without looking at him. Money, she said simply. Something about the flatness of the word, not self-pity, just fact, kept him from saying anything else. She left. He stared at the ceiling and thought about how long it had been since anyone had answered one of his questions that directly. He had visitors, of course. Marcus Webb, his chief operating officer, appeared on day 3 with a leather portfolio and the particular expression of a man who had been holding things together by sheer force of will and needed his boss back immediately. They spent 40 minutes going through the most urgent concerns. Declan signed 3 documents left-handed because his right wrist was compromised, and Marcus looked relieved and left. Julian Hart, his best friend and legal counsel, came twice. Julian brought terrible hospital coffee and better conversation and was the only person who asked how Declan was actually feeling rather than how his recovery was progressing. Different, Declan said honestly. Different how? Like someone moved the furniture in a room I thought I knew. Julian nodded slowly. The memory thing. Dr. Fenwick says it might come back. But, Declan looked at his left hand, at the cast on his wrist. There are things I should remember that I can't find, and it bothers me more than the broken leg, which is strange, because the leg hurts significantly more. Julian stayed for 2 hours. He was the kind of friend who could sit in silence without making it feel like something that needed to be filled. After he left, Lena came in to collect the extra cups and the packaging from a meal tray. Your friends seem decent, she said. Julian is. Marcus is. Declan paused. Marcus is complicated. He's loyal. But he'd keep the company running even if I died, and I'm not sure whether that's admirable or unsettling. Lena considered this. Probably both. He looked at her. Probably both, he agreed. The first time Lena Marlowe had seen Declan Vale's name on a hospital intake form, she had stood very still in the hallway for approximately 45 seconds. Not because of his money, not because she recognized him from business news or profiles, though she did vaguely, in the way that you know someone exists without ever having paid close attention. Because his name was the name of a boy she had known when she was 14 years old, and unlike Declan, her memory of that time was not missing at all. She remembered it the way you remember the things that kept you alive. She had not planned to end up in his room. That wasn't how auxiliary assignment worked. But the staff rotation had put her there on his second conscious morning, and she had walked in fully prepared to do her job quietly and leave. And instead he had spoken to her, and she had made the rookie emotional mistake of looking him in the eyes. He didn't know her. She had known, intellectually, from the charts, from what the nurses said, that he had memory gaps from the head injury. She had prepared herself for the possibility that he might not recognize her. She had rehearsed how she would handle it, had been almost clinical about it in the privacy of her own apartment the night before. Then she looked at him, and he looked back with absolutely zero recognition, and she felt something fall sideways inside her chest. She covered it. She was good at covering things. But she hadn't been able to stop herself asking. On the third morning, with the water pitcher in her hand and his eyes on her face and the silver bracelet visible on her wrist, "Do you remember me?" And he had looked at her, honestly, carefully, with the kind of effort that suggested he was genuinely trying, and said, "Should I?" She had smiled. She had said, "I don't think so. My mistake." And she had walked out of the room and stood in the supply corridor for 3 minutes before she was capable of continuing her shift. She had told herself, after that she would simply do her job. That was the rational thing. He was a patient. She was support staff. The fact that they had once known each other, briefly, years ago, in a context so different from this that it might as well have been a different planet, was irrelevant. It was not her place to tell him. It was not her place to wait for recognition that might never come. She had survived much harder things than this. She had survived her father's second layoff, and the eviction that followed, and 3 months in her aunt's apartment with 4 people sharing 1 bathroom. She had survived her mother's diagnosis and the years of managing treatment schedules and medication costs on an auxiliary worker's salary. She had survived nursing school applications and the particular humiliation of watching financial aid fall through twice, and then a third time, reducing the degree she'd spent years working toward to a recurring item on a list of things she couldn't afford. She had survived all of it. She could survive being forgotten by someone who had once been kind to her. But the thing about survival is that it doesn't stop you from feeling things. It just teaches you where to put them. It was Maisie who created the opportunity, though she had no idea she was doing it. Declan's daughter was not allowed to visit the hospital, something about pediatric exposure policies and Declan's infection risk. So Maisie's presence existed entirely through a battered iPad that Rosa, the nanny, brought to the room 3 times a day. Declan's conversations with his daughter were the only times his face changed completely. Every guard dropped, every careful executive neutrality disappeared. He became, there was no other word for it, soft. His voice went lower and quieter, and the lines around his eyes changed shape entirely. Lena had heard 3 of these calls, not by eavesdropping, but by the nature of hospital rooms, where sound traveled and walls were thin, and there was no good way to leave without making a conspicuous exit. She had heard Maisie say, "Daddy, does it hurt really bad?" And heard Declan say to me, "Yeah, Bug, it hurts pretty bad." And Maisie say, "But you're going to walk again, right? They said you would walk again." And the small pause before he answered, "That's what they tell me." "But you don't believe them." Another pause. "I'm working on it." Maisie had made a sound that might have been a sob, quickly swallowed. "I drew you a picture. Rosa's going to bring it tomorrow. It's the 2 of us at the beach. I made us look really happy. I'll put it up right when I get it. Promise?" "I promise." After the call ended, Lena had been pretending to organize something near the storage cabinet. She glanced over and found Declan looking at the ceiling with the particular expression of a man fighting something he was not going to win. "She sounds like a good kid," Lena said. Declan didn't answer immediately. "She's the best person I know," he said finally. "And that's a strange thing to say about a 7-year-old, but I mean it literally. She is the best person I know." Lena was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask something?" "You can ask." "Were you always like that with her, even when she was small?" She paused. "I'm asking because some people who work very hard at being formidable professionally, they sometimes can't turn it off, the armor, even with their kids." Declan turned his head to look at her. "No," he said slowly. I was better with her than I was with anyone else. She was the one person I never had to be someone specific for." He frowned. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Because I'm not anyone," Lena said evenly. "I'm just the person who refills your water pitcher." Something shifted in his expression. "That's not why." "Then why?" He looked at her for a moment. "I have no idea," he said. "Which is irritating. I usually know why I do things." Lena picked up her water pitcher. "Maybe your brain got jostled enough that you're just saying what you actually think." She was halfway to the door when she heard him say, "The bracelet." She stopped. "Who gave it to you?" he asked. She turned around slowly. "You did," she said. She watched his face go through several things very quickly. Confusion, the impulse to correct her, a second layer of consideration that kept him from doing so. "I don't remember that," he said carefully. "I know you don't." "Tell me the story." She shook her head. "I don't think that would help you." "How do you know what would—" "Because the memories you've lost are yours," she said quietly. "If I give you the story, you'll have my version. That's not the same thing." She met his eyes. "Some things have to come back on their own, or they're not really yours anymore." She left before he could respond. She sat in the supply corridor again, but this time only for a minute. Progress, she thought. She was getting faster at the covering up. The fragments came back to Declan at night. This was the pattern Dr. Fenwick had warned him about. The brain processing during rest, memory surfacing in half-images without context. Not nightmares exactly, more like poorly lit photographs of places he couldn't fully identify. He got the rain first. Heavy summer rain, the kind that doesn't care what it falls on. A bus shelter somewhere. A cheap municipal thing, scratched plastic roof. A bench with a crack down the middle. The smell of wet pavement and something else. Something fried from a nearby restaurant. He got the shoes next. A girl's shoes. Canvas sneakers. The kind that didn't belong on a teenager who was wearing them because they were what she had, not because they were fashionable. The left one had a piece of duct tape across the toe where the sole had started to separate. He lay awake at 3 a.m. cataloging these fragments with the same discipline he'd apply to reconstructing a corrupted data file, working from the edges inward, trying to build context around the images. He got rain, shoes, a sound of crying, female, young, very carefully muffled the way someone cries when they don't want to be caught at it. The gray-green color of wet grass through the gap at the bottom of the shelter. A paper bag with a sandwich inside, slightly damp at the corner from being carried in the rain. He could not get the face. He pressed the call button and asked the night nurse for something for the headache he'd developed, and spent the remaining dark hours staring at the ceiling and feeling, with growing certainty, that the fragment was important. In the morning, Lena came in at 7:45. He was already awake. She could tell. He had the look of someone who had spent the night in his head rather than in sleep, the particular tight quality around the eyes. She started her routine. Water, IV check, light adjustment. "I had a dream about rain," he said. Lena's hand paused on the curtain pole. "Not a dream," he corrected. "More like, I don't know what to call it, a piece of something." "What kind of piece?" "A bus shelter, wet pavement, a girl's shoes, while canvas. One of them had tape on the toe." He was watching her carefully. "Does that mean anything to you?" Lena pulled the curtain smooth and turned to face him. She kept her voice level. "Why would it mean something to me?" "Because you said I gave you the bracelet," Declan said. "Which means we knew each other, which means whatever I'm starting to remember might be about you." Silence. "What else do you remember?" she asked. "Nothing yet." He paused. "But I remember the sound. The girl in the shelter she was crying and trying not to. The way you cry when you're embarrassed to be caught." Lena said nothing. "That's a very specific sound to dream about," Declan said. "Yes," Lena agreed. "It is." She turned back to the window. "Do you want me to tell you?" she asked. "I'll tell you if you want. I changed my mind about the other thing. It's been sitting with me." She heard him think. "No," he said finally. She turned, surprised. "Not yet," he said. "You were right the first time. I want to find it myself, if I can." He paused. "But I want you to tell me when I get close. Can you do that?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "Can do that." It was the physical therapist, a brisk woman named Sandra, who appeared to consider sympathy a form of professional failure, who first suggested that Declan was not pushing himself hard enough. "You're favoring your right side," Sandra said during the third session. "You're compensating because you're afraid of what happens when you put weight on the left." "My leg is broken," Declan said. "Your leg had a clean fracture that has been surgically stabilized and is healing ahead of schedule. Your reluctance is psychological." Declan stared at her. In 16 years of running a company, he had not been spoken to with quite this level of bluntness since a 14-year-old girl had told him he was wrong about something, years ago, in a way he couldn't now remember. "What exactly do you want me to do?" he said. "I want you to put weight on it." "It's going to hurt." "Yes." "Then what's the point of telling me it's psychological?" "The point," Sandra said patiently, "is that knowing the fear is mental doesn't remove it. It just changes your relationship to it. Now, hands on the bars, left foot first." He did it. It hurt badly. He did it again. Lena was not supposed to be in the therapy room, but the therapy room was connected to a hallway where supply carts were regularly stationed, and she passed through twice in the 40 minutes Declan spent relearning how to put weight on a leg that did not want to cooperate. The second time she passed, she stopped in the doorway and watched him for a moment. He was white-knuckling the parallel bars. His jaw was set in a way that suggested he was having a detailed internal argument with his own central nervous system. He got 4 steps, and the 4th one made him stop and breathe through his teeth. "Again," Sandra said. Declan looked up. He saw Lena in the doorway. She gave him absolutely nothing sympathetic, just a flat look that said, "You've got 4 more steps in you." He did it again. Later, back in his room, breathing carefully through the afterburn of exertion, he said, You were watching. Lena was changing the supply bag near his bed. I had to walk through. You stopped. Briefly. Why? She looked at him. Because sometimes people need someone to see them doing something hard, even if that person doesn't say anything about it. He was quiet for a moment. Did someone do that for you? He asked. At some point, when you were doing something hard. Lena looked down at the silver bracelet. Once, she said. He was getting close. She could see him getting close, the way you see someone almost but not quite arriving at the edge of something. His eyes had that quality, searching inward, turning something over. I remember something else, he said. Yeah? A sandwich. He frowned. From a paper bag, getting damp because someone walked in the rain to bring it. Lena said nothing. I think that was me, Declan said slowly. I think I was the one who walked in the rain. She looked at him and did not say a word. Tell me if I'm wrong, he said. You're not wrong, she said quietly. The room was very still. His eyes found hers, and in that moment he was as close as he'd been yet. Not quite there, but close enough that she could see him working at the edge of it, pulling at threads. Lena, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. Yeah, she said. I'm going to remember, he said. I know I'm going to remember. And when I do, he stopped. When you do, she said carefully, we'll deal with it then. I'm sorry, he said, for not remembering yet. She looked at him. Don't apologize for that, she said. That's the concussion's fault, not yours. She picked up her cart and left before either of them could make the moment mean more than it should right now, more than it was ready to carry. She walked down the hallway and through the supply corridor and out the back door into the small staff courtyard, where no one usually went at 10 in the morning, and she sat on the bench and put her hands in her lap and looked at the silver bracelet catching the early light. He's close, she thought. She didn't know if that made things better or worse. She stayed on the bench for 7 minutes, which was all she had. Then she went back to work. The memory came back on a Wednesday, not all at once, not in some cinematic flood of images that resolved into perfect clarity. That was not how damaged memory worked, and Declan had learned in the past 2 weeks that his brain was doing things on its own schedule regardless of how much he wanted to accelerate the process. It came in pieces, the way a photograph develops in a darkroom, starting from nothing and building slowly through gray and shadow until the edges sharpen. It started with a name. He had been awake since 5 in the morning, which had become his pattern, the pain in his leg working as a reliable alarm clock, the hospital settling into its pre-dawn quiet, where you could hear the ventilation system and distant footsteps, and your own thoughts with unusual clarity. He had been lying on his back, staring at the ceiling tiles and working through a problem with his Singapore infrastructure team that Marcus had relayed the previous afternoon, running numbers in his head the way he used to in the early years of the company when spreadsheets existed only on paper, and you did the math yourself. And then, without warning, between one breath and the next, a name surfaced from somewhere below conscious thought. Marlowe. Not Lena. Not a face. Just a name, attached to nothing he could see yet, carrying the particular weight of something that had mattered. He lay very still, the way you stay still when a deer appears at the edge of your yard and you know that any sudden movement will send it back into the trees. Marlowe. A family. A household that had been struggling. He got the outline of the fact without the details yet, the way you know the shape of a piece of furniture in a dark room without being able to name it. A father. A job lost. An apartment they couldn't keep. He pressed his eyes closed and pushed, which Dr. Fenwick had told him not to do because forcing rarely worked and sometimes made the gaps feel bigger. He pushed anyway. What came back was not the full picture. It was a sound, his own voice, younger, rougher, not yet used to its adult register. Saying something to someone smaller than him, saying, "It's not your fault your dad lost his job. That's not how any of this works." He didn't know who he was talking to. But the name was still there when Lena came in at 7:45. She came in the way she always did, quietly, with her cart and her routine, and she had made it as far as the IV line before he said, "Marlowe." She went perfectly still, Not the polite kind of stillness, the held breath kind. Say that again, she said without turning around. Marlowe, Declan said. That's your name. Lena turned. Her face was doing something complicated. He had gotten better at reading it over the past 2 weeks, learning the architecture of her expressions, which were all in the eyes and the set of her jaw, because her mouth she kept carefully neutral. Right now her eyes were bright in a way he hadn't seen before. Yeah, she said. That's my name. Lena Marlowe. Yes. He pushed himself up slightly against the pillows. I heard my own voice, talking to someone. I couldn't see who, but I was saying... He stopped. I was telling someone it wasn't their fault their dad lost his job. Lena sat down in the chair beside his bed, which she had never done before. She sat like someone who had just had the strength go out of their legs at an inconvenient moment. That's right, she said. Was it you? Yes. How old were we? You were 16. I was 14. He looked at her. What town? Crestfall. She said it like she was reading from a map. You were in Crestfall for about a year before your family moved. Your father got transferred. A tech company. Not the one you built. This was before all that. Declan ran through what he could access. His family's move, that was there. Vaguely, the sense of disruption, boxes, and a different school. He had always known they'd moved during his high school years, but the specific location had been one of the gaps. Crestfall, he repeated. Population 12,000, one decent pizza place, and the coldest school bus stops in the entire state. She said it dryly, but her hands were clasped together in her lap with more tension than the tone suggested. Why were you crying? Declan asked. Lena looked at the window. Outside it was an ordinary morning, Bussy. Overcast, pigeons on the ledge across the way, the distant sound of a delivery truck. 3 reasons, she said, and they all happened on the same day, which seems like the kind of thing the universe does when it's really committed to a bit. She paused. My dad had just found out his second attempt at finding work had fallen through, which meant we were 3 weeks from losing the apartment, which I found out that morning before school from listening through a wall because nobody told me anything directly. They thought I was too young to hear it. She paused again. And then at school, 2 girls in my class had noticed that my sneakers were taped at the toe. They told the entire lunch table, very loudly. A short, humorless breath. So I was not in a great place when the rain started. Declan was quiet. I was under the bus shelter for about 20 minutes, she continued, trying to stop crying before I had to get on a bus full of people who had just watched me get humiliated. And then you showed up. He shook his head slowly, not disagreement, but the frustration of a man trying to see something through fog. I can hear my voice, he said. I can hear myself talking, but I can't see it yet. That's okay. What did I say to you? You want me to tell you what you said to yourself? I want to know, he said. Even if it's your version. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she seemed to make a decision. You sat down next to me, she said, which was already strange because you didn't know me. We weren't in the same grade. We weren't friends. I don't think we'd ever spoken. You just sat down on that bench and opened your bag and took out half a sandwich and put it on the seat between us. She shook her head slightly. I told you I didn't want it. You said okay and left it there anyway. And then you said, you can be upset. That's just real. But the thing about today is that it's one day, and tomorrow you get to be a different version of the story. Declan stared at her. I said that? 16-year-old, you had a surprisingly developed sense of self-help philosophy. That's... He stopped. That's a strange thing for a 16-year-old boy to say. Yes, Lena agreed. It was. That's probably why I remembered it. She looked at her hands. I'd heard a lot of people say things like, it'll get better, or you're being too sensitive, or other people have it worse. You were the first person who didn't tell me how to feel. You just said, the feeling is real, and the situation is also not the whole story. Which sounds simple. But when you're 14 and you're drowning in it, someone saying that's real, and it's also not permanent. It's different. The room was quiet enough that Declan could hear the ventilation. Did you eat the sandwich? He asked. Lena almost smiled. I ate the sandwich. Good, he said. I hate wasted food. And there it was, the thing she hadn't expected, which was that the adult version of him had the same dry, unexpected humor as the teenage version. It hit her somewhere she hadn't prepared for, and she had to look away at the window again for a moment. "You came back the next day," she said. "Did I?" "And the day after that. You just kept turning up." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "You helped my family find a cheaper apartment in the next building over. You didn't make a production of it. You just said you'd heard about it from someone, which was probably not true, but—" she shrugged. "And you got in an argument with a senior on my behalf once, which ended badly for your jacket, but reasonably well for my social standing." Declan was watching her face. "What happened to my jacket?" "The senior had a slushie." "Ah. A red one." He looked at the ceiling. "I remember something blue," he said. "Something cold. I thought I was remembering the rain, but—" "Red," she confirmed. "You were wearing a blue jacket." "I was furious about that jacket." "You were. But I didn't—" He stopped. The fragment was there now, incomplete but real. "I didn't say anything to you about the jacket. I just—" "You said it was fine," Lena said quietly. "And then you went home and I found out later from someone else that you'd been really upset about it." He turned to look at her fully. "You kept track of what I was feeling?" "You were the only person in that school who treated me like a person," she said evenly. "Of course I paid attention." The weight of that landed on him in a way that several of his executives' elaborate concern had not managed to. He stayed with it. "I left," he said. "My family moved. About 8 months after we met, the week before your junior year." "And you stayed." "And I stayed." He looked at the bracelet. "I gave you that before I left." "Last day," she said, "you came by the apartment. You'd worked a summer landscaping job, and apparently you spent—" She stopped, seemed to calculate whether to say it, then continued. "You spent a substantial portion of what you'd earned on it, which I didn't know until years later when I priced them out of curiosity." "Why did you price them out?" "Because I was going to sell it once, when things were very bad." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "I needed rent. I needed medication for my mother. I picked it up and went to a pawn shop and stood outside for 15 minutes and then went home." "You didn't sell it?" "No." "Why not?" She looked at him directly. "Because it was the only thing anyone had ever given me that wasn't something they owed me." The silence after that was the kind that has texture. Declan looked at the bracelet on her wrist. He couldn't remember buying it. That specific memory was still missing. But the fact of it was clear now, the meaning of it, the weight. "I'm sorry it took me this long to come back," he said quietly. Lena shook her head. "You didn't owe me anything." "I know that," he paused. "I still—" "Declan." She said his name the way you use someone's name when you want them to hear you properly. "You were 60. You were kind to someone who needed it. That was the whole thing. You don't owe me a life debt because you were kind once. The bracelet wasn't a contract." "I know that too," he said. "Then stop apologizing." "I'm going to remember more," he said. "It's coming back. I can feel it. There's more." "There's more," she confirmed. "And you've been here every morning," he said slowly. "Knowing all of this, knowing who I was to you, and knowing I had no idea." "Yes." "That must have been—" He stopped. "It was what it was," she said, which was the kind of answer that covered a significant amount of ground while revealing very little. "Lena." "Don't." She stood up, not abruptly, but decisively. "Don't feel sorry for me about it. I've got a thick skin and I've survived considerably worse, and I'm a grown adult who made a choice to do my job professionally instead of making your recovery about my feelings. That was the right call." She picked up her cart. "You're getting the memory back. That's what matters." "Sit down," he said. "I've got 3 more rooms on this—" "Sandra doesn't start therapy until 9, he said. "You have time. Sit down." She looked at him. Something in his voice, not commanding exactly, but the kind of steady certainty that comes from a person who has spent years in rooms where decisions get made, kept her from arguing with it. She sat. "Tell me about now," he said. "Not then." Now, what does your life look like? She seemed surprised. Why? Because I know what you were dealing with at 14. I don't know what you're dealing with at 30. I'm fine. That's the most useless word in the English language, he said. She almost laughed. Almost. I work here, she said. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that I share with my mother, who is in remission from breast cancer, which means we're in the monitoring phase. I've been trying to complete nursing school for 3 years, but the financial aid keeps coming up short. She said this the same way she said everything, flatly, without self-pity, with the cadence of a person reporting facts rather than seeking comfort. I have a savings account that contains $412, which is not enough to cover the next semester. I work double shifts when I can get them. I eat a lot of rice and whatever's on sale. She met his eyes. I'm not telling you this so you'll do something about it. I'm telling you because you asked. I know why you told me, he said. Then we're clear. We're clear. He leaned back. What do you want to be? Not what you're settling for? What do you actually want? She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the pigeons shuffled on the ledge. Pediatric nurse, she said. Not the floor stuff. The kids in long-term care, the ones who are there for months. She paused. I have a talent for... She stopped, seemed to think this was too much to say. Say it, he said. I have a talent for making them feel less invisible, she said finally. Which is not a clinical skill. But I watch the kids come through here sometimes when I'm moving between departments, and I can see which ones have given up on being seen as people, and which ones are still hoping someone will notice them as more than their diagnosis. And I can... She stopped again. I know how to notice people. It's the thing I'm best at. Declan said nothing for a long moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I believe that. She looked at him. You should get some sleep before Sandra gets here. She's going to make your morning miserable. Sandra makes every morning miserable. It's her philosophy of care. It's working, Lena said. You're ahead of schedule. She told you that? She mentioned it, in the context of don't let him know or he'll slack off, which she told me in the hallway, and then immediately looked sorry she'd said it. Declan almost smiled. Don't tell Sandra I know. Obviously. She stood up again, and this time she made it to the door. Lena, he said. She paused. I'm glad you didn't sell the bracelet, he said. She didn't turn around, but she stopped walking for 1 full second. Yeah, she said. Me too. She left. He lay back against the pillows and looked at the morning light coming in the window, still gray, still overcast, and felt something that had been missing from the first day of his recovery. Not quite peace, more like an orientation, a sense of which direction was forward. He closed his eyes and let the rest of the memory come, slowly, on its own time. There was more. She had said so. He trusted it. He slept. He remembered more of Crestfall over the following 3 days. It came in order now, which Dr. Fenwick said was a good sign. The brain reconstructing the narrative rather than pulling out-of-sequence fragments. He remembered the school, a regional high school with a leaky gym ceiling and a vending machine that stole quarters. He remembered his locker, which was on the 3rd floor and always smelled like old gym bags. He remembered 3 teachers, a friend named Okafor who was going through his heavy metal phase, and the stretch of residential streets between his family's rental house and the bus stop where he had first seen Lena sitting in the rain. He remembered her more clearly each day. The specific quality of her voice, which was careful and measured in the way that people who have learned to expect interruption often speak. The way she'd argued with him exactly once about a book they'd both read for class. She had thought the ending was a betrayal of the character. He had thought it was the only honest choice. And she had been so completely committed to her position that he'd ended up reading the last chapter again just to understand her argument. He had concluded at the time that she was right. He still thought she probably was. He remembered her telling him once that she wanted to be a nurse, that her aunt had been a nurse and it was the most useful thing she could think of to be. She had said useful the way other people said important, as if usefulness was the highest available aspiration. He remembered thinking that it wasn't a small word coming from her, that she meant something specific by it that had to do with not being overlooked, with mattering in tangible, physical ways. He remembered the last day. The bracelet had cost him $43 and change, which in the summer he was 15 going on 16 had represented about 3 weekends of landscaping work. He had gone to a small jewelry shop 2 towns over because he hadn't wanted to run into anyone from school and have to explain himself. The bracelet was simple, silver, a small hammered texture, a clasp that the woman at the shop had told him was very sturdy. "For someone special?" the woman had asked. "For my friend," he'd said, and meant it exactly the way he'd said it, without anything complicated underneath. She was his friend. She was 14 and struggling, and he was about to leave, and she had no one else that he could see who was reliably on her side, and he wanted to leave something behind that meant you mattered. This was real. He remembered her face when he'd given it to her on the doorstep of her apartment. She hadn't cried. Lena, even at 14, had deployed tears with the strategic restraint of someone who had learned that showing weakness in public invited more of the thing you were crying about. But her face had done something that he hadn't had the vocabulary for at 16 and wasn't sure he had the vocabulary for now. He pressed the call button. When the night nurse appeared, he asked for a pen and paper, which was not standard issue, but the nurse, a patient man named Terrell, who had developed a pragmatic attitude toward Declan's more unusual requests, found him a notepad and a ballpoint. Declan wrote at the top of the page, "Things I need to do when I get out of here." The list had 12 items on it. Item 1 was, walk without the cane. Item 2 was, get Maisie from camp the first day she was available for pickup. Item 3 was, after some thought, figure out what you owe Lena Marlowe and understand that she will not tell you she needs anything, so you will have to pay attention. He drew a box around item 3. He put the notepad on the bedside table. He went back to sleep. Marcus Webb had the talent of making every visit feel like a board meeting, even in a hospital room with fluorescent lighting and a broken TV remote. He arrived on the 12th day with a portfolio, 2 associates who stayed near the door looking at their phones, and the expression of a man who had been managing a $2 billion company single-handedly for nearly 2 weeks and had opinions about it. "The board wants a timeline," Marcus said, setting the portfolio on the tray table before Declan had fully adjusted his position. "Good morning, Marcus." "It is not a good morning. The Singapore deal is stalled because Park wants your personal assurance on the infrastructure timeline and won't take mine. Yolanda has been running PR for the accident, which has been effective, but she's going to need guidance on the Q3 communication strategy because the speculation is getting—" "Marcus," Declan said it the way you say someone's name when the alternative is physically stopping them. "Sit down." Marcus sat. It was a practice move, the kind where you sit, but you're clearly ready to stand again immediately. "How's Maisie?" Declan asked. Marcus blinked. He was not a man who was asked about Maisie in the context of business meetings. Rosa says she's doing well. She's asking to visit." "I know. I'm working on the pediatric exception with Dr. Fenwick." He paused. "I'll be back in the office in 3 weeks." The board was hoping— 3 weeks, Declan said. "I walk correctly before I go back. That's non-negotiable." Marcus looked at him. In 16 years, he had learned to read the versions of Declan, the negotiable ones and the ones where the decision had already been made. This was one of the second kind. 3 weeks, Marcus said. "And tell Park I'll call him Thursday at 8 his time." "He'll accept that." "Good." Declan looked at the portfolio but didn't open it. "There's something else I want you to start researching." "What kind of research?" "Foundations. Specifically ones focused on economic mobility, housing assistance, educational access, vocational training, what the landscape looks like, what the gaps are, who's doing it well and who's doing it badly, and what the difference is between the two." Marcus was quiet for a moment. His face did not change. In his profession, face changes were liabilities. "That's a significant shift in focus," he said carefully. "I'm not shifting focus. I'm adding one." Declan looked at him. "I've been thinking about what the company is for." "It's for— I know what the numbers say it's for," Declan said. "I'm talking about something different." Marcus considered this. "Is this because of the accident?" "Probably partly." Declan looked at the window. "And partly because someone reminded me of something I used to know and then forgot." He paused. "Get me the research." "Good analysts. not just whatever's already in our CSR portfolio. I'll have a preliminary report in 2 weeks. 10 days. 2 weeks is 10 days, Marcus. You have 400 employees. Marcus stood, picking up the portfolio. He was almost to the door when he stopped, in the specific way of someone who has thought of something that surprises them. Declan, he said. Yeah. It's good to have you back. He said it stiffly, the way a man says something genuine when he hasn't budgeted for sincerity. Not because of Singapore, it's better when you're in it. Declan looked at him. Go find me those reports, Marcus. Marcus left. The two associates followed and the room settled back into quiet. From the hallway, Lena appeared. She must have been waiting for the meeting to end, her cart positioned near the door, probably having heard most of it through the hospital's efficient acoustic properties. She came in and started her routine. Foundations, she said, after a moment. You heard. I wasn't eavesdropping. The door was ajar. I know. He watched her work. What do you think? I think it's interesting that you started planning that before you finished remembering, she said. He thought about that. Maybe I didn't need to finish remembering to know what direction to go. She was quiet for a moment, checking the IV. Your little girl, she said. What's she like? The change of subject was deliberate. He had learned that Lena redirected when something got too close to feeling significant, but he answered it anyway, because Maisie was never a subject he was reluctant to discuss. Relentless, he said. In the best possible way. She has opinions about everything. The correct way to cut sandwiches, triangles, she is very firm on this. The unfairness of most adult logic, which she articulates better than most attorneys I've hired. She wants a dog. I've said we'll discuss it. He paused. What she means when she says she wants a dog is that the dog already exists in her mind and she's just waiting for me to catch up. Are you going to get the dog? Almost certainly, he said. I have no leverage. She knows it. Lena was smiling, thus actually smiling, not the careful version she deployed when things got too real. It changed her face entirely. She sounds like someone worth getting better for, she said. She's the only reason I let Sandra make my life difficult for 40 minutes every morning, he said. I want to walk in and get her myself. Not in a wheelchair, not with a cane. He paused. She's going to run at me. Yeah, Lena said softly. She will. The smile was still there, but it had shifted into something quieter, something he recognized, the expression of a person who is holding both warmth and their own version of grief in the same moment, and managing it. When did your mother get diagnosed? He asked. She paused. 3 years ago? And she's in remission. Monitoring phase, 3 more years of monitoring before they consider it fully clear. That's hard, he said simply. It is what it is. Lena, I told you that was a useless phrase. She gave him a flat look. We can't all have your bedside manner. You have a very good bedside manner. I've been observing it for 2 weeks. That's for patients, not for me. Why can't it be for you too? She looked at him and then looked away. Because if I allow myself the luxury of saying, yes, this is hard, and yes, I am tired, and yes, I have been running on thin for 3 years, then it becomes real in a way that's harder to manage. She picked up the water pitcher. And I don't have the time or the infrastructure for it to become real. He looked at her, at the worn cuffs of her uniform, at the careful way she held herself, not hunched, not defeated, but contained. Like someone who had learned to occupy as little emotional space as possible because space cost money she didn't have. That's not sustainable, he said. I know that, she said. What are you going to do about it? She looked at him with an expression that said, I'm standing in a hospital room on a double shift refilling your water. What do you think my options are? I'll figure it out, she said. He said nothing else. He had learned, over 16 years of running a company, of managing people, of building teams, that there was a moment in certain conversations where the right move was to stop talking and let the thing you'd said settle. The ground needed time to absorb water. He let her finish her routine. She left. He picked up the notepad from the bedside table and looked at item 3. He didn't underline it again. He had been raised by a practical man who had taught him that emphasis only works once. After that, it's just noise. He put the notepad down and looked at the ceiling and thought about Maisie and about foundations and about a girl who had learned to take up as little space as possible while doing more work than half the people around her, and felt, with the particular clarity that hospital ceilings seemed designed to produce, that he had been given something back in this room that was worth considerably more than anything the accident had taken. He just wasn't sure yet what to do with it that wouldn't ruin it. That was a problem for a man who could walk without a cane. He had work to do first. The infection started on a Thursday. Declan noticed it first, which was either a testament to his attention to detail or to the fact that he had been lying in a hospital bed with nothing to do but monitor his own body for 2.5 weeks. There was a warmth around the surgical site on his left leg that had not been there the previous evening, a low-grade heat different from the ordinary ache of healing bone. He pressed the call button at 5:47 in the morning before the day shift had fully turned over, and the nurse who came, a younger woman named Petra, who was still in her first year, looked at the site and left and came back with Dr. Anand, the orthopedic surgeon who had stabilized the fracture in the emergency surgery 17 days ago. Dr. Anand was a compact, serious man who wore the same expression during good news and bad news, which Declan had initially found unsettling and had since come to recognize as a form of professional kindness, the refusal to telegraph before he was certain. He examined the leg without speaking. He asked Petra for 2 things in medical terminology Declan partially understood. He looked at the overnight temperature charts. He stood back. "There's an infection developing at the surgical site," he said. "We're going to start IV antibiotics immediately and monitor closely." "And if the antibiotics don't work," Declan said. It wasn't really a question. Dr. Anand looked at him with the measured evenness that Declan had learned to read. "Let's see how you respond first. I appreciate the optimism. Tell me what happens if they don't work." A pause. "There's a possibility that if the infection spreads to the bone, we'll need a second surgical intervention." "What kind of intervention?" "Debridement of the affected tissue, possibly hardware removal and replacement. And the recovery timeline on that, significantly longer than what you're currently tracking." Declan was quiet for a moment. "What's the risk to function?" Dr. Anand held his gaze. "In a best-case reoperation scenario, you are looking at a longer recovery but full function restored over time. In a more complicated scenario..." He stopped. "Say it," Declan said. "There is a range of outcomes. Some of them include permanent changes to mobility." The room was very still. "Define permanent changes to mobility," Declan said. "Reduced range of motion, possible gait abnormalities. In worst-case scenarios..." Dr. Anand folded his hands. "We're not at worst case. We caught this early. The odds are meaningfully in your favor, but you asked for honesty, and I'm giving it to you." After Dr. Anand left to start the antibiotic order, Declan lay flat on his back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He thought about Maisie running at him across a room. He thought about the notepad on his bedside table with its list of 12 things. He thought about item 1, walk without the cane. He reached over and picked up his phone and called Rosa. "Is Maisie awake?" he asked when she answered. "It's 6:15, Rosa said. "I know." A pause. "I'll get her." He waited. He could hear the sounds of his own house through the phone, the particular acoustic quality of the kitchen, the sound of Rosa's footsteps on the upstairs hall, a door, then small feet, faster. "Daddy?" Maisie's voice was thick with sleep. "Hey, Bug. Why are you calling so early? Did something happen?" "No," he said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough for 6 in the morning. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Silence. Then, "You sound weird." "I'm fine." "You said fine. You always say that word is useless." He almost laughed. "Almost. You're too smart." "I know." A shuffling sound, Shao. She was getting comfortable. "Rosa made me go to bed at 8:30 last night. I told her you would not approve." 8:30 is a perfectly reasonable bedtime. "I'm 7, not a baby. 7-year-olds need sleep." "I was reading." "What were you reading?" "The one about the dog who goes on an adventure. The third one." A pause. "Daddy, when are you coming home?" He looked at the ceiling. I'm working on it. That means you don't know. It means I'm working on it. Another pause, longer. The picture I sent you, did you put it up? It's right on the wall in front of my bed, he said, which was true. Rosa had taped it at exactly eye level from where he lay, per his instructions, and it was the first thing he saw every morning. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands on a beach, both with enormous smiles, the sun in the corner the size of a cantaloupe. Maisie's name signed at the bottom in her careful, newly learned cursive. The sun is too big, Maisie said. I know that. I just like it that way. The sun is exactly right, Declan said. You're biased. Completely. She made a sound that was half laugh, half yawn. Come home soon, okay? Rosa is nice, but she doesn't argue with me the way you do. I argue with you because your arguments are worth arguing with. I know, she said. That's why I like it. After he hung up, he put the phone down on the blanket and closed his eyes and did not let himself spiral into the thing that was waiting to spiral. He had run a company through 3 recessions, a major lawsuit, a data breach, and a year when he'd been genuinely unsure he could make payroll. He knew how to hold the bad possibility at arm's length while still taking it seriously. He was good at that. He was less good at it when the stakes were his own legs. Lena came in at 7:45 and knew immediately, not from anything he said. He hadn't said anything yet. She came in during her normal routine, water and IV and supply check, and he was watching her the way he did when he was thinking about something other than what was in the room. She looked at the IV line. She saw the antibiotic bag that had been added. She looked at him. When did they catch it? She said. This morning. Early. Dr. Anand? Yes. She finished checking the IV with steady hands. What did he say? He said we caught it early, and the odds are in my favor. But, he looked at her, but if the antibiotics don't take, there's a second surgery, and a range of outcomes that includes permanent mobility changes. Lena was quiet for a moment. What did Dr. Anand actually say, specifically, about the range? She asked. Not soft. Precise. He said in worst-case scenarios there could be gait abnormalities and reduced range of motion. She nodded, absorbing this with the clinical part of her. The part that had spent 4 years watching people receive medical information and had developed an accurate sense of what was real fear versus catastrophizing. What's your actual risk level based on how early they caught it? She asked. He didn't give me percentages. He doesn't usually, but he will if you ask directly. Do you want me to? No, Declan said. I don't want percentages right now. She stopped. Okay. What I want, he said, is for you to tell me something honest that isn't about the infection. She looked at him. What does that mean? It means I've been lying here since 6 a.m., having a very controlled internal crisis about whether I'm going to walk normally again, and Dr. Anand has said everything medically accurate that can be said, and what I need right now is not more medical accuracy. He paused. You told me something once, in the shelter, about tomorrow being a different version of the story. You told me that, she said, not me. Then I'm asking for it back. She sat down in the chair. She didn't have time for this. She had 4 more rooms and a resupply cart that needed processing before 9, and she sat down anyway. The infection is bad news, she said. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. It's a complication on top of a recovery that was already hard. She held his gaze. And you are going to respond to the antibiotics. You don't know that. You're right, I don't know it for certain. She folded her hands. But I've watched you in physical therapy twice a week for 2.5 weeks. I've seen how you respond to pain. You process it and push through it instead of freezing at it. That's not just willpower, that's physiology. Bodies that respond to recovery that way tend to respond to treatment too. She paused. That's not optimism, that's pattern recognition. He looked at her. You've been watching me in therapy. I told you I passed through. You pass through twice a week on the same day at the same time. A beat. Sandra's schedule is predictable. Lena. I watch a lot of patients in therapy, she said evenly. It's a professional habit. It's more than that. She didn't answer. Her jaw did something. A slight tightening, then released. I'm not going to tell you you're fine, she said, steering back. You hate that word. But I will tell you that the thing you're most afraid of, not walking, not being able to pick Maisie up, not being there the way you need to be there, that fear is real, and it's also not what's happening yet. You're still in the part where the antibiotics might work. Don't grieve the surgery before you know you need it. He was quiet. That's what you said to me, she said quietly. In the shelter, essentially. Don't live in the worst version of the story before you know it's the one you're in. I said it better at 16, apparently. You said tomorrow you get to be a different version, which is the same thing with better phrasing. She stood. The medication is in. Dr. Anand will check tomorrow. Until then, she looked at him steadily. Your daughter drew you a picture with a sun the size of a planet. That's the story you're in right now. He looked at the drawing on the wall. She left. He spent the rest of the morning waiting for the antibiotics to do something. The waiting was the hardest part. Harder than the initial pain of the fractures, harder than the first morning of physical therapy when Sandra had looked at his left leg with the clinical disappointment of someone whose machine wasn't performing to spec. Harder, even, than the 5 days after waking when the memory gaps had been their most disorienting and he'd lain in the half-dark cataloging what he couldn't find. Waiting without action was the one thing Declan Vale had never been good at. He called the Singapore team Thursday afternoon and talked through the infrastructure timeline with Park's deputy directly, which took 90 minutes and resolved 3 of the 4 stalled points. He dictated notes to Marcus's assistant on the foundation research he'd requested. He read through the preliminary brief Marcus had sent. It was 11 days early, which told Declan that Marcus had understood something was shifting and had decided to get ahead of it rather than be caught behind. He put sticky notes on 4 pages of the brief with questions. He did the breathing exercises Dr. Fenwick had prescribed for the headaches that still surfaced when he pushed his cognitive load too hard. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about the bracelet. He'd been thinking about it since the morning Lena told him she'd stood outside a pawn shop for 15 minutes with it in her hand. The image had settled into him the way certain things do. Not urgently, but with the particular weight of something that belongs to you that you've only just gotten back. He had been 16 years old, and it had not occurred to him that $43 was significant relative to what he had. It had been his summer earnings. He'd been proud of them, in the way a teenager is proud of money that is entirely their own. But there was always the implicit understanding that his family was stable, that there would be more money, that the landscaping job was choice rather than necessity. Lena had not had that understanding. She had stood outside a pawn shop because she needed rent money, and she had a medication bill for her mother, and the bracelet was the only asset she had that wasn't already encumbered by someone else's need. And she had walked away from the money because the bracelet was the one thing she owned that a person had given her without an invoice attached. He thought about what she had said. It was the only thing anyone had ever given me that wasn't something they owed me. He wrote that down in the notepad. Not because he needed to remember it, it had already embedded itself where things go when they're going to stay, but because writing things down was how he processed what he intended to act on. He had built a habit of it in the early years of the company, when everything was too fast and too important to leave in his head. He looked at what he'd written. He looked at the 12-item list. He thought, there is a version of this where I offer her money and she refuses it, and the conversation becomes about my wealth and her pride, and neither of those things is the point. He thought, there is another version where I think about what she actually needs and approach it differently, like a problem, like something that has a solution if you're willing to look at it from the right angle. He thought about nursing school, about the gaps in financial aid, about what those gaps actually looked like structurally, not the emotional weight of them, but the mechanics. What was missing? What form it took? Whether there was a way to address it that wasn't a handout, but was also honest about what it was. He wrote, talk to Julian about 501c3 structures. What does a bona fide scholarship program require? How do you make it real rather than personal? He underlined real rather than personal. He put the notepad down. The antibiotic bag was 3/4 empty. His leg felt the same as it had that morning. He didn't know if that was good or bad. He looked at Maisie's drawing. He closed his eyes. But Julian came Friday morning, which was not his scheduled day. This meant Marcus had called him, which meant Marcus was more worried than he'd shown during the Wednesday visit, which told Declan several things about Marcus's loyalty that he filed away for later. Julian arrived with 2 cups of coffee and the careful expression of a man who knew there was bad news and was calibrating how to lead with it. "The infection," Julian said, sitting down. "Marcus told you." "Marcus tells me everything. It's his primary emotional outlet." Julian handed him the better of the 2 coffee cups, a distinction visible only in which cup Julian kept, but which Declan had noticed over 17 years of friendship. "How bad is it?" "Waiting on antibiotic response. I'll know more tomorrow." Julian nodded. He didn't say, "I'm sure it'll be fine," or "you'll get through this," or any of the other reassurances that people deployed when they needed to fill silence. He drank his coffee. "I started the research on foundations," Julian said after a while. "Marcus told you about that too." "Marcus also thinks it's either a post-trauma response or a sign of profound personal growth, and he can't decide which one makes him less comfortable." Julian looked at him. "What is it actually?" Declan thought about how to say it without making it sound like something out of a self-help book. He'd been trying to find the language for it since the conversation with Marcus. "There's a woman who works here," he said. "Hospital auxiliary staff. She's been in my room every morning for 3 weeks." He paused. "We knew each other when we were teenagers. I didn't remember her because of the head injury. She knew who I was the whole time and didn't tell me, just kept doing her job." Julian was quiet, listening. "She's been trying to get through nursing school for 3 years and can't cover the gap in financial aid. She's been supporting her mother through cancer treatment on an auxiliary worker's salary. He stopped. "She's the kind of person who falls through every crack in every system because she doesn't have the infrastructure to advocate for herself, and she's too proud to ask for help from someone she knows personally." He looked at Julian. "I want to do something, but if I do it personally, she'll refuse it. She'll categorize it as charity, and she'll resent it, which she has every right to do." Julian turned his cup in his hands. "So you want to build a structure that she can access without it being about her specifically?" "I want to build a structure that 100 people like her can access," Declan said. "And yes, also her." Julian looked at the ceiling for a moment. "The foundation research," Marcus ordered. "Starting point." "And how long have you been thinking about this?" "Since the 2nd week." He paused. "I was thinking about it before I even fully remembered who she was." Julian was quiet for a long moment. "You know what this sounds like?" "Don't," Declan said. "I'm not saying anything." "Good. I'm just noting that—" "Julian, you built a billion-dollar company and you've never once talked to me about redirecting significant resources toward a social mission," Julian said carefully. "And now, 3 weeks after meeting a woman who you claim is just someone you knew in high school—" "It's not like that," Declan said. "I didn't say what it was like." "You had an expression." "I always have an expression. I'm an attorney." Declan looked at the window. "It's not that. I want to be clear about what it is. She reminded me of something I used to care about before the company got big enough to become its own gravity field." He paused. "I used to understand that money was a tool. When you have a lot of it, it stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like the point. She reminded me that it's still a tool." He paused again. "That's what it is." Julian looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "That's all?" "You're a grown man with a brain injury who's waiting to find out if he needs another surgery. I'm not going to argue with you about your motivations." He finished his coffee. "I'll draft a preliminary structure for a 501c3 with a focus on economic mobility. Give me 2 weeks." 10 days. "You said that to Marcus, too. He told me." Julian stood. "The answer is still 2 weeks. Some things take the time they take." He was at the door when Declan said, "Jules." Julian turned. "Thanks for coming," Declan said. "Today specifically." Julian nodded once. "Call me when you get the antibiotic results." He left. The room went quiet. The morning light had improved. The persistent overcast was breaking, and there was actual sun coming through the window for the first time in several days, hitting the floor in a rectangle of pale yellow. Declan looked at it. Lena came in at her usual time, slightly later than 7:45 because she had 2 extra rooms on her rotation, and she moved through her routine with the particular efficiency she carried on busy mornings. He'd learned to read her schedule from her pace. Unhurried meant normal load. The quick, precise movements meant she was running behind. She was running behind. She checked his IV and saw the antibiotic bag was being replaced. The second bag, which meant they were through the first cycle. "How's the leg feel?" she asked. "The same." "Same as yesterday morning, or same as last night?" He thought. "Last night." She nodded. "That's something." "What does it mean?" "It means it's not getting worse, which at 20 hours in is what you want." She looked at the chart Petra had updated at 6 a.m. "Your temperature is down half a degree from last night." Dr. Anand didn't mention that. Dr. Anand came at 5:30, and the 6 a.m. reading wasn't in yet. She put the chart back. Half a degree is not a victory, but it's not nothing. Declan looked at her. "You read my chart." "I read everyone's chart. I told you, I've been doing this for—" "You read mine specifically," he said. "You know my temperature reading from 6 a.m. You have my antibiotic cycle timing memorized." She met his eyes. "You're a complicated case. You have 4 other rooms. 3, today. 1 got discharged." "Lena." She looked at him with the particular flatness she deployed when she was deciding how to handle something. "Yes?" she said finally. "I pay closer attention to your chart than is professionally required. I'm aware of that. And before you say anything about it, I wasn't going to say anything about it." She stopped. "I was going to say thank you," he said. She picked up the water pitcher. "Don't make it strange." "It's not strange. You've been keeping track of my recovery with more attention than most of the nursing staff." He paused. "That's not nothing. You don't have to explain it or minimize it." She filled the pitcher with her back to him. "The temperature drop is a good sign," she said. "I'll check the 8 p.m. reading and compare." "You don't work nights." "I work a split today, back at 6. She turned. He was looking at her with something that was not quite pity and not quite gratitude, and was some third thing he didn't have clean language for. "Stop," she said. "I haven't done anything." "You have a look." "What kind of look?" "The kind where you're deciding something," she said. "And I want you to know that whatever you're deciding, the answer is no." He raised his eyebrows. "I haven't proposed anything." "You've been building toward something for 3 days. I can hear you thinking." She set the pitcher down. "Whatever you're working up to, the answer is no. I don't want your money. I don't want a job offer. I don't want you to fix my life because you feel like you owe me something from when we were teenagers." "That's not what I'm doing," he said. "Then what are you doing?" He held her gaze. "Building something that you can access if you choose to, that you're not the center of. That's bigger than the 2 of us." He paused. "And when it's built, you can decide whether you want to engage with it or not. That's your choice. I'm not asking for anything." She looked at him for a long moment. "What kind of thing?" she said carefully. "A foundation," he said. "Focused on economic mobility, housing, educational access, medical support for families in situations like your mother's." He paused. "Julian is drafting the structure. It'll be real, board-governed, publicly accountable, competitive application process. Not a personal favor. A legitimate program." Silence. "You started planning this before you knew about the infection," she said slowly. "Yes." "Before you even fully remembered who I was?" "Yes." She turned that over. He could see her turning it over. The careful, methodical way she examined things that mattered. "Why?" she asked, not defensively. Genuinely. "Because I've had 3 weeks to lie in a hospital bed and think about what my money is actually for," he said. "And because you said something to me, not a speech, just a thing in passing, about knowing how to make people feel visible. And I thought, that's what's missing, not programs, not the infrastructure. The instinct that you can't teach." He met her eyes. "The money already exists. The instinct needs to be in the room." She looked at him. Her jaw was doing the tight then release thing. "I'm not going to be a charity project," she said. "I know that. If I apply to anything, I apply through the same process as everyone else." "That's how it works, yes." Another long pause. "You could have told me you were planning this." I wanted to tell you when it was concrete enough to not sound like a gesture, he said. It's not concrete yet, but you asked. She picked up her cart. The 8 p.m. temperature reading, she said. If it drops another half degree, you're probably responding. She looked at him. I'll let you know when I check it. I'll be awake. You're always awake. Hospital beds do not encourage sleep. She almost smiled again. Get some rest, Declan. She left. He sat in the quiet for a while. His leg didn't feel worse. He thought that might be the closest thing to optimism he was allowed right now, and he decided it was enough to work with. He picked up the notepad. He crossed off item 3, the one he'd drawn a box around. He wrote underneath it, smaller, started. Let her decide the rest. He looked at item 1, walk without the cane. Still there. Still the goal. He was not going to grieve it before he knew he needed to. He looked at Maisie's drawing. He looked at it for a long time. At 8:53 in the evening, his phone lit up with a text from an unsaved number he recognized as the extension for the staff communication line. Temp down another 0.6 degrees. Looks like the antibiotics are working. L. He stared at the screen. He typed back, "Thank you." A pause. Then, "Don't thank me. Thank the medication." He smiled at his phone in the dark of the hospital room, which was the first time he had smiled without it costing something in 2 weeks. He put the phone down. He closed his eyes. He slept. The antibiotics worked. Not dramatically, not all at once. This was not the kind of recovery that announced itself. It was incremental in the way that real healing almost always is. A degree of temperature here. A slight reduction in the redness there. Dr. Anand pressing carefully around the surgical site on Saturday morning and doing the thing with his face that Declan had learned to read as cautious approval. The response is good, Dr. Anand said. We'll continue the current course through Monday and reassess, but the trajectory is positive. Declan said, define positive in terms I can use. The infection is receding. The risk of secondary surgery has dropped significantly. Dr. Anand made a note in the chart. You're not out of the woods entirely, but you're moving in the right direction. Physical therapy on Monday, Dr. Anand looked at him over the chart. Light work, modified. Sandra will adjust the protocol. Sandra doesn't adjust anything. She escalates. Then have that conversation with Sandra. He closed the chart. Rest this weekend. Let the medication do its work. After he left, Declan sat with the information for a few minutes. He was good at receiving bad news, had spent 16 years developing the skill, but he was less practiced at receiving good news without immediately looking for the catch. The infection receding felt like a door opening that he'd been pressing his full weight against, and now that it was moving, he wasn't sure what to do with the sudden absence of resistance. He called Rosa. Maisie was at a neighbor's birthday party and couldn't come to the phone, but Rosa said she'd been drawing more pictures and had declared this morning at breakfast that her father was probably the toughest person alive, which Rosa delivered with the dry warmth of a woman who had spent 5 years translating Maisie Vale's emotional landscape for the adults around her. He called Marcus and told him the infection was responding, and Marcus said good, in a tone that contained about 4 more words worth of relief that he did not release. He called Julian and left a voicemail saying the foundation research could move to the next stage. Then he put the phone down and had nothing to do, which was its own particular kind of difficult. He picked up the notepad, flipped past the 12-item list to a blank page. He wrote at the top, "What does this look like when it's real?" And underneath that he started writing, not the polished language of a business brief, but the rougher working version. The thinking on paper that he'd done at 22 in a cramped office when he'd been trying to figure out how to save a company that everyone said was already dead. Housing assistance for families in transitional poverty. Not emergency shelter. There were organizations for that. The gap was in the space between crisis and stability. The families who had gotten through the worst of it but couldn't afford the step that would get them out of the cycle. First month, last month rent deposits. Moving costs. The practical expenses that kept people stuck even when they were working. Educational access, specifically for people who were mid-path, who had started a degree or certification program and had to stop, not because they couldn't do the work, but because the money ran out at the wrong moment. Nursing school, vocational training, not full scholarships for 18-year-olds applying from high school. That ground was covered. The gap was in the people who were 28, 30, 32, trying to finish something they'd started while also keeping a life running underneath it. Medical support for families managing chronic illness while below a certain income threshold. The specific cost of keeping someone alive, not the surgical bills, which insurance sometimes touched, but the ongoing expenses. Medication. Transportation to appointments. The time lost from work that no insurance policy covered. He wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. His wrist ached, the left one still in the compression brace, and he switched to a looser grip and kept going. He was on the third page when Lena came in. She was doing weekend hours, shorter rotation, different rhythm. She came in at 8 instead of 7:45, moved more slowly than her weekday pace, and there was something slightly less armored about her on Saturdays that he'd noticed without commenting on. "You're writing," she said. "Foundation structure," he said. "Rough draft." She looked at the pages on the bed around him. "That's a lot of rough draft." "I think better on paper." She started her routine. IV, water, curtain adjustment for the morning light. Dr. Anand came? "Yes, the infection is receding." She stopped, turned. The look on her face was not the careful neutral she usually maintained. It was something more immediate, something that got through before she could manage it. "That's okay." She turned back to the IV. "That's very good news." "Your temperature readings helped," he said. "Catching the half-degree drop at 8 p.m. Dr. Anand mentioned it. Said early trending data was useful. I put it in the chart." "I know." He read the chart. He paused. It mattered. She was quiet for a moment, doing something with the supply bag that did not require the level of attention she was giving it. "Lena," he said, "I'm fine." "I know you are. I'm not asking if you're fine." He waited. "I'm telling you that what you did, the attention you paid, the readings, the pattern recognition, that contributed to a better outcome. That's just true. You can accept it." She turned around. Her eyes were slightly brighter than usual, which she dealt with by keeping her expression completely level, which was a maneuver he recognized because he used a version of it himself. "I'm glad you're not having another surgery," she said. "So am I," he said. "Sit down." "I have 3 rooms on a Saturday and you got here 8 minutes early. Sit down." She sat. He looked at her for a moment. "Can I show you something?" He handed her the notepad, open to the first page. She took it carefully, the way she handled things that had been given to her, with a slight deliberateness that was probably not conscious but was there. She read. He watched her face while she read. It was the most unguarded he had seen it, the careful architecture relaxing as she moved through the pages, her brow doing something complicated at the section about mid-path education, her jaw tightening at the medical support paragraph. She read all 3 pages. She handed it back. "This is good," she said. Her voice was even. "What's wrong with it?" She looked at him. "Why do you assume something's wrong with it?" "Because you read it and didn't say anything about the medical support section, and that's the section that's most directly relevant to your life, and you're someone who responds to the things that are least comfortable for you with the most silence." She looked at the window. "The transportation line," she said after a moment. "You wrote transportation to appointments for chronic illness management." "That's correct." "That's a real gap, but it's not just the transportation to appointments, it's the follow-up. The pharmacy. The specialist referrals that happen 3 weeks after the initial appointment. The whole chain." She paused. "People miss the follow-through not because they don't want to go, but because by the time they've managed the first appointment, the second one is scheduled during a shift they can't miss, and the cost of missing the shift is higher than the cost of delaying care." She paused again. "Until it isn't. Until the delayed care becomes a crisis that costs 20 times more and the person ends up in an emergency room." Declan was already writing. "What else?" he said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, a slight discomfort, as if she'd expected him to receive the information and file it, but hadn't expected him to immediately ask for more. "The housing section," she said slowly. "First month, last month deposits? Yes, that's real. But there's another layer. When people in transitional poverty find housing, they often find it in buildings with maintenance issues that a middle-income tenant would report and have fixed. Broken heating, mold, structural problems. And they don't report them because they're afraid of drawing attention to themselves, afraid of being seen as difficult tenants, afraid the landlord will find a reason to end the lease. She picked at the thread on her sleeve again, the nervous habit he'd cataloged over weeks. A tenant rights component, someone who can make the call on their behalf. That's a legal services component, he said. Yes. Julian can build that in. He wrote it down. Keep going. I'm not a policy expert. You're better than a policy expert. You've lived in the system you're describing. He looked up from the notepad. Keep going. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her deciding, the same way she'd decided 3 weeks ago in this same room, whether to answer his question about the bracelet, weighing the cost of engagement against the cost of staying back. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, and started talking. She talked for 22 minutes. He wrote almost continuously. She talked about the specific humiliation of means testing, the forms that required you to prove your poverty repeatedly to different agencies that didn't communicate with each other, the time cost of that proof, which was itself a tax on people who could least afford to lose work hours. She talked about the gap in vocational programs between what they promised and what they delivered, the job placement statistics that looked good on paper because they counted any employment, not employment in the field you'd trained for. She talked about what it actually felt like to be a person who was working as hard as she could and still falling short, not the emotional weight of it, which she described only in passing, but the mechanics, the specific points where the floor gave way. She stopped at some point and seemed to realize how long she'd been talking. Sorry, she said. Don't apologize. You got specific, he said. That's not something to apologize for. He looked at the pages. This is 4 additional program elements you just gave me. She looked at the notepad, at the density of what he'd written. Something moved across her face that she covered quickly, but not before he saw it. A complicated mix of recognition and something that might have been grief, the particular grief of watching something you've needed for years exist, finally, on a piece of paper. It might not work, she said. Programs like this, the gap between the idea and the implementation is where everything falls apart. Yes, he said. That's why I'm not doing it alone. He looked at her directly. I need people who know where the gaps actually are, not consultants, people who've fallen through them. She met his eyes. I'm a hospital auxiliary worker, she said carefully. You're the most precise analyst I've talked to in 3 weeks, and that includes my COO and 2 institutional investors. He paused. I'm not offering you a job. I'm not asking you to take anything. I'm asking if, when this is built and it's real and it's publicly open, you would be willing to sit in a room with the program directors and tell them what you just told me. Silence. That's it, she said. That's it. No strings. None. She looked at the notepad again. I'd have to see what they build first, she said, before I'd say anything to endorse it. I'm not putting my name on something I haven't read. That's not a string. That's just sense. And I'm not doing it as Lena Marlowe, who grew up poor and therefore represents poor people everywhere. I'd be speaking to specific programmatic gaps based on specific experience, and if they want broader representation, they need to build a proper advisory structure. Already in the plan. She looked at him. You planned an advisory structure. I wrote it 20 minutes before you got here. He showed her page 2. She looked at it. You have a notes section that says Lived Experience Advisors, Non-Tokenizing Structure, she said. Non-tokenizing was Julian's word. He's more precise about language than I am. She sat back. Declan? Yeah. This is a real thing you're building. Yes. Not a gesture. No. Because you've been in this hospital bed for 3 weeks and you've had a lot of time to think. And sometimes people... I know what sometimes people do, he said. I've watched it happen in corporate social responsibility for 16 years. The announcement with no follow-through. The initiative that runs for 18 months and quietly dissolves. He met her eyes. That's not what this is. I have enough money that I can build something structurally sound. And I have enough failures behind me to know that the thing that kills programs like this is not funding, it's design. It's whether the people who built it actually understand what they're building for. He paused. That's what I'm fixing. She looked at him for a long time. Okay, she said. He waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. She stood up, and for once she didn't immediately move toward her cart. She stayed standing in the middle of the room for a moment, which was unusual enough that he noticed it. What? He said. Nothing. She shook her head. It's just, when you were 16, you helped me move boxes to a new apartment. You carried boxes for 4 hours in the wrong shoes and didn't complain about it. He thought. A fragment. Yes. Worn sneakers, a day he'd told his mother he was at Okafor's, carrying cardboard boxes up 2 flights of stairs in an apartment building that smelled like old carpet and cooked onions. I remember the stairs, he said. They were steep. The elevator was broken and had been broken for 8 months. She paused. The thing is, you didn't make a speech about it. You just showed up and carried boxes. And then when it was done, you ate a terrible sandwich my mother made as a thank you, and you said it was good even though it clearly wasn't. What was wrong with the sandwich? She put mustard on tuna fish. He winced involuntarily. Yeah, she said. You were very polite about it. She picked up her cart. My point is, you didn't need to make it mean something big. You just kept doing small things until they added up. He looked at her. I know, he said quietly. This, she gestured at the notepad, at the room, at the general direction of the thing they'd been talking about. This is bigger than boxes. I understand that. I'm not minimizing it. She paused. I just want you to know that the boxes mattered too. The things that don't look like much from the outside. The sandwich, he said. The sandwich, she agreed. She left. He sat with the notepad in the morning light and the strange fullness of having been reminded, by someone who had reason to know, that he had once been the kind of person he was trying to be again. Sandra came Monday morning with the modified protocol and a look that suggested she had opinions about it. Light, she said, reading from the adjusted sheet Dr. Anand had filed. Modified weight bearing, 15 minutes maximum. She looked up. This is because of the infection. The infection is receding, Declan said. I know that, which is why we're doing 15 minutes instead of 0. She folded the sheet. You've lost ground. The 2 days of limited movement while the antibiotics stabilized will have stiffened the joint and reduced some of the flexibility gains from last week. We're not starting over, but we're not where we were on Thursday. Understood. You're not going to argue with me about the 15 minutes? No. She looked at him. Your doctor said you were going to argue about the 15 minutes. I reserve the right to argue about it on Wednesday. Sandra made a sound that might have been the closest she came to a laugh. Wednesday we reassess. If the site looks clean and Dr. Anand clears it, we go back to full protocol. She put the sheet away. Let's see what you've got. What he had, it turned out, was less than Thursday, but more than Sandra's pre-session expectations, which she communicated not with praise, but with the absence of the pointed commentary she'd deployed at lower-performing sessions. He got 12 minutes before the leg told him clearly that it was done, and he stopped without being told because he had learned, across 4 weeks of Sandra, that pushing past the real limit was different from pushing past the comfortable one, and this was the real one. Sandra made notes. Wednesday, she said. If Anand clears you, we go back to full protocol and we're going to work on the stairs. Stairs? You live in a house. Houses have stairs. You need to be able to use them before you go home. He hadn't thought about the stairs. He thought about them now. The staircase in his house. The one Maisie slid down on a pillow when she thought he wasn't watching. The one that went up to her bedroom. How long before I can do stairs, he asked. Depends on Wednesday and the week after. We're not putting a date on it yet. Approximately. Sandra looked at him. You have a specific reason for the timeline. My daughter, he said. She's 7. She's been waiting a month. Sandra was quiet for a moment. The first time he'd seen her quiet for a reason other than professional calculation. If you're cleared Wednesday and you do full protocol for the next 10 days, she said carefully, stairs are possible before discharge. I'm not promising. I'm saying possible. That's enough, he said. Don't take it as a guarantee. I heard you. She left. He sat in the chair in the therapy room. They'd moved from the bed to a chair last week, another incremental victory, and looked at the parallel bars and the scuff marks on the floor where hundreds of patients had taken their first uncertain steps, and felt something that was not quite peace, but was in the neighborhood of it. The feeling of a problem that was still hard but was no longer impossible. The feeling of ground that would hold. The photograph appeared on a Wednesday. He came back from therapy, full protocol reinstated, Dr. Anand having examined the site that morning and declared the infection resolved, Sandra having put him through 45 minutes that included, at the very end, 4 steps up a small practice staircase that had left him gripping the rail with both hands and breathing through his nose, and found Lena in his room. She wasn't doing her routine. She was standing near the window, and she had something in her hand. She turned when he came in, which meant she heard the slight uneven rhythm of his gait. He was walking without the walker now, still not quite right, still with the careful deliberateness of a man rebuilding trust with a leg that had recently betrayed him. "How was Sandra?" she asked. "Stairs," he said. "Already?" 4 steps, with a rail. He lowered himself into the chair with the controlled movement that had replaced his pre-accident habit of dropping into furniture without thinking. "Don't be impressed. I look like a very cautious toddler." 4 steps is 4 steps. She paused. "I have something for you." She held out what she was holding. It was a photograph. Small, printed on the thin paper of an older photo printer, slightly faded at the edges. The kind of photo that had been handled many times over many years. He took it. 2 teenagers under a school banner, a gymnasium or hallway. He could see the edge of some kind of institutional sign above them. The boy was taller, dark-haired, in a jacket that was not blue, but which he now remembered had replaced the blue one that the slushy incident had destroyed. The girl was smaller, standing slightly to the side, and she had the careful posture of someone who had been asked to be in a photograph and wasn't sure where to put her body, but she was smiling. Actually smiling, not the polite version, and her left wrist was turned slightly inward, the silver bracelet catching the flash. He looked at it for a long time. "Where did you get this?" he said. "I took it," she said. "A kid in your grade had one of those disposable cameras. It was some kind of school event. I don't even remember what, some fall thing. He was taking pictures of everyone. You pulled me into it." She paused. "I asked him for the print when he developed them." "You kept it." "I kept it." He looked at the boy in the photograph. He looked young, younger than 32-year-old Declan could easily locate himself in, though the jawline was recognizable, and the posture, and something about the way he was standing next to the girl that communicated a kind of careless protectiveness, the body language of someone who is not thinking about how they look because they're thinking about the person next to them. He looked at the girl. He looked at Lena standing by the window, 30 years old in a faded uniform with a silver bracelet on her wrist. "You carried this through everything," he said. "It's a photograph." "Lena." "It fit in my wallet," she said. "It wasn't sentimental. It was just small." "You carried it through the evictions." She turned to the window. "Yes. And the pawn shop." "I didn't take the photograph to the pawn shop." "But you had it." "Yes." He looked at the photograph again, at the girl's wrist, at the bracelet, new then, not yet worn from years of wearing. "Thank you for showing me," he said. "I thought you should have it." She turned back. "You don't remember that moment. But it was yours, too." He looked at her. "Keep it," he said. She looked surprised. "You've had it for 16 years," he said. "It belongs to you more than it belongs to me." He held it back out. "I have the memory now. You keep the proof." She looked at the photograph. At him. She took it back slowly. "You're strange," she said. "You've said stranger things to me with more sincerity. I said you were relentless." "Same thing." She put the photograph in her pocket. Something in her face had gone soft in a way that she was clearly not pleased about, and he watched her do the thing she always did. Locate the professional exterior and pull it back into place like a coat she'd briefly taken off. 45 minutes of full protocol, she said, and stairs. 4 steps. You'll be going home soon. 2 weeks maybe. Dr. Fenwick wants another cognitive assessment. Sandra wants 10 more days of therapy. Dr. Anand wants the site to stay clean for a full month post-infection. That's less than 2 weeks, she said. 12 days, realistically. She nodded. Her hands were at her sides, and she was standing with the straightness she adopted when she was making something look easier than it was. Then there's something I should tell you, she said. Before you go. He waited. I looked up the foundation, she said. Julian filed the preliminary documentation last week. It's in public record, the 501c3 application. I read it. Okay. It's good, she said. Structurally, the program categories are right. The oversight structure is real, not performative. She paused. The tenant rights component is in there. Julian's more thorough than I give him credit for. There's an advisory board structure with paid positions for people with lived experience in the program areas. She looked at him. Paid. Yes. You didn't mention it would be paid. I mentioned there were no strings. Paid compensation for advisory work isn't a string, it's a salary. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone recalculating. The nursing school financial aid component, she said. The mid-path education program. Yes. The application criteria. She stopped. They're specific. They describe a person who is... They describe a situation that is... The criteria describe a gap in the existing financial aid structure that affects a specific demographic, he said carefully. People who began professional training programs had to pause for economic or caregiver reasons and need a bridge to complete. The criteria were drawn from, he paused, from notes taken during a conversation with someone who understood the gap. Silence. You wrote the criteria based on my situation, she said. I wrote the criteria based on a structural gap that your situation illustrated, he said. You are not the only person it describes. There are hundreds of people it describes. But I'm one of them. Yes. She was quiet for a long moment. The afternoon light had shifted. It was later than their usual conversations, the light coming from a lower angle, turning the institutional floor of the room something closer to gold. I'm going to apply, she said. Through the normal process. That's all I'm asking. And if I'm not the strongest application, I don't get it. That's how it works. And this doesn't... She stopped. Whatever this is, whatever these past 5 weeks have been, that doesn't factor into the decision. He met her eyes directly. The foundation will have an independent review board. I'm recused from individual application decisions by the governance structure. He paused. It was Julian's suggestion. I agreed with it. She looked at him. You recused yourself. It was the right call. She looked at the window. Outside, the afternoon was bright. A full summer afternoon, the kind that had no interest in the complicated things happening in hospital rooms. You're going to be a decent person to know, she said. Not warmly, exactly. More like a verdict reached after careful deliberation. I've been trying, he said. You're not there yet. I know that. But you're trying in the right direction. She picked up her cart. That's something. She was almost at the door. Lena, he said. She turned. When I leave, he said, I'd like you to meet Maisie. She was very still for a moment. She's seen your picture on the wall, he said. The beach drawing. She asked Rosa who the picture was for. He paused. I told her it was for a friend. Lena's mouth did something small and complicated. I'd like that, she said. She left. He looked at the afternoon light on the floor and thought about Maisie running across a room and about 4 steps on a practice staircase and about the distance between where he was and where he needed to be, which was shorter now than it had been on any of the mornings he'd woken up in this room, and shorter than it would be tomorrow and the day after that. Small things. He picked up the notepad. He crossed off item 1. He looked at it for a second, then wrote it again underneath. Walk without the cane. For real this time. He kept the list. He still had work to do. He left the hospital on a Thursday morning. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare or a wheelchair pushed by a cheerful orderly. Declan had declined the wheelchair on principle, which Sandra had called stubborn and Dr. Anand had called inadvisable, and which Declan had done anyway because the whole point of the last 5 weeks had been learning to walk out of a place under his own power, and he was not going to undermine that in the final 50 yards. He walked slowly. He used a cane, one concession, the one Sandra had insisted on for the first 2 weeks at home, and he had agreed because Sandra had a way of framing non-negotiables that made arguing feel genuinely pointless. His gait was not what it had been before the accident. It was careful where it used to be automatic, deliberate where it used to be thoughtless. Dr. Anand had said that 90% of that would resolve over the next several months. The remaining 10% they would reassess in 6. Declan had decided he could live with 10%. The corridor from his room to the main entrance was longer than he remembered from the night he'd arrived, though he had no memory of arriving, only of waking up, so what he was comparing it to was something imagined rather than real. It passed the physical therapy room, which was empty at 7:45 in the morning, the parallel bars catching the early light. It passed the nurse's station where Terrell, ending his night shift, raised a hand in a small wave. It passed the supply corridor where he knew, from 37 mornings of observation, that Lena parked her cart when she was running behind. She was not there this morning. He had said goodbye the evening before. She had come in at the end of her split shift, later than usual, a Thursday evening, the light going amber through the window. And she had come in without her cart, which was the first signal that this was not a routine visit. She was in her regular clothes, dark jeans, a gray shirt, the kind of practical combination that suggested she'd changed after her shift ended and come back. She sat in the chair. "You're leaving tomorrow," she said. 7:45 discharge. "Rosa's picking you up?" "Rosa and Maisie." He paused. Maisie lobbied extensively for the privilege. She prepared a written argument, 3 points, with supporting evidence. Rosa forwarded it to me last week. What were the points? 1. She had been waiting the longest, so she had seniority. 2. Rosa was a good driver but did not fully appreciate the importance of the occasion. 3. She had made a sign. He looked at the ceiling. "I don't know what the sign says." She refused to tell me. She said it was a surprise. Lena was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like a lot." "She is an enormous amount," he said. "She is the most exhausting and most essential person in my life." Silence settled between them, the comfortable kind. The kind that had developed over 5 weeks of morning routines and honest conversations, and the particular intimacy of a hospital room where there is nowhere to hide and no performance sustainable long enough to maintain. "I looked at the foundation application again," she said. "The mid-path education program." "Yes." She looked at her hands. "The deadline is October 15th. Julian sent me the direct link." "Julian sent you shot?" "I asked him for it," she said. "Last week, I called his office." Declan looked at her. "You called Julian's office?" "He was very professional about it. He just sent the link and said to reach out if I had questions about the criteria." She paused. "I had questions about the criteria." And I qualify," she said. It came out flat, which was how she said things that mattered. All 5 criteria: the paused program, the caregiver situation, the income threshold, the completion timeline. She looked at the window. "I didn't expect to meet all 5. "The criteria were built from research into what actually stops people," he said carefully. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "It's strange, seeing your own situation described in program language. Eligibility criteria." She turned her bracelet on her wrist, a gesture he'd seen her make when she was working through something. Like being a category instead of a person. "That's the part we're trying to fix," he said. "The advisory board, the lived experience component." "I know." She turned the bracelet once more and stopped. "I'm going to apply." "I know you are." "I might not get it." "You might not," he agreed. "There are going to be strong applications." "And you're recused." "Completely." She nodded. She seemed to want to say something else and was deciding whether to. "What?" he said. When I walked away from the pawn shop, she said, with the bracelet. I went home and I sat in my kitchen and I thought, that was a stupid decision. I need the money more than I need the object. She paused. But there's a thing that happens when you've been surviving for long enough on your own that kindness starts to feel. It starts to feel like a debt, like something that will cost you later. Because in my experience, things given without strings had strings you just couldn't see yet. He didn't say anything. The bracelet didn't have strings, she said. I knew it when I got it, and I knew it standing outside that pawn shop. It was the only thing anyone had given me in years that I didn't have to pay for in some other currency. She looked at him. And now you've built this thing, this foundation. And it doesn't have strings either. I can see that. The governance structure, the recusal, the independent board. She stopped. That was deliberate. Yes, he said. You built it so it couldn't feel like a debt. I built it so it wouldn't be one, he said. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the evening had gone full dark, and the window reflected the room back at them. Two people in a small lit space against the night. I'm going to be a good nurse, she said. It was not a question. It was not a wish. It was a statement delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who has finally allowed themselves to say out loud the thing they have known privately for years. Yes, he said. You are. I'm going to be good at it specifically because I know what it feels like to be overlooked in a system that's supposed to be helping you. She looked at her hands. I'm going to be annoying about it. I'm going to advocate for patients in ways that will probably irritate some of the doctors. Good, he said. I'm just telling you so you're not surprised later. I'm not going to be surprised. She looked at him with an expression he had learned over 5 weeks to read as the one that came right before she said something real. You were a strange kid, she said, 16 years old, and you sat down next to a crying girl you didn't know and gave her half a sandwich and didn't make it weird. She paused. Most people would have kept walking. Most people did keep walking. I don't remember making a decision about it, he said honestly. I just sat down. I know. She stood. That's why it worked. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair. She was halfway to the door when she stopped and turned, and for a moment she just looked at him. At the room they had spent 5 weeks in, at the chair where she had sat more times than was professionally required, at the drawing on the wall that Maisie had made with the sun the size of a planet. You should bring her by the center, she said. When it's built, the youth component you were talking about, the mentorship piece. Maisie would be good for that. She'd try to run it, he said. She sounds like she could. He looked at Lena. Come meet her tomorrow, he said. Before we leave, 7:30. You're here at 7:45 anyway. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She left. He lay back and looked at the ceiling for the last time, and did not feel the way he'd expected to feel, which was relieved. He felt something more complicated than relief. He felt the specific weight of a chapter that had cost something real and given something real back, and he was not entirely sure he was ready for it to end. But ready had never been the requirement. Showing up had been the requirement. He turned off the light. He slept. Maisie arrived at 7:28, which meant Rosa had given up on keeping her in the car. Declan heard her before he saw her. Small sneakers on hospital linoleum have a particular sound, rapid and purposeful, and there was a brief exchange in the hallway between Maisie and someone on the nursing staff that he couldn't quite make out, but which ended with a door opening and his daughter appearing in the frame of it, 7 years old, and holding a piece of poster board above her head with both hands. The sign said, "Welcome home, Daddy." In red and blue letters, surrounded by what appeared to be every sticker she owned. She had also drawn a dog in the corner. They had not yet resolved the dog question. He was sitting in the chair, dressed, cane beside him, bag packed, and when she saw him, her face did the thing that he had been trying to get back to for 5 weeks. The thing that made the parallel bars and Sandra's 40-minute protocols and the infection and all of it worth exactly what it had cost. She put the sign down and ran at him. Careful, Rosa started from the doorway. It's okay, Declan said, and opened his arms and caught his daughter and held her. She was 7 years old and small, and she smelled like the apple shampoo Rosa used for her hair, and she was crying in the completely unself-conscious way that children cry when they have been holding something for too long, great shuddering exhales against his shoulder, her arms around his neck with a grip that was going to leave marks. He held on. He did not tell her to stop crying. He did not tell her it was okay, because it had not been okay. It had been a hard month, and she had been 7 years old and frightened and waiting, and that deserved to be acknowledged rather than tidied away. He held on until she was done. She pulled back and looked at his face with the critical assessment of a person conducting an inspection. "You look different," she announced. "I've been in a hospital for 5 weeks. You look," she considered, "more tired, but also more like yourself." He looked at her. "How is that possible simultaneously?" "I don't know," she said. "It just is." She looked around the room, at the drawing on the wall. "You really put it up." "I told you I would." She got down and went to it, studying it with the dispassionate eye of an artist reviewing her own old work. "The sun is still too big," she said. "The sun is exactly right." "You're biased." "I told you that before." She peeled the drawing carefully from the wall, handling it with a delicacy she did not apply to most things. She folded it precisely in thirds and handed it to him. "You can keep it," she said, "but we should put the new one up at home. I made a better one. There are more colors." "Is there still a big sun?" "Bigger," she said, without apology. He laughed. "The first real one in 5 weeks. Not the controlled kind, not the wry kind, but the involuntary kind that comes from somewhere below the professional architecture." Rosa appeared in the doorway. "We should get the car around." "1 minute," Declan said, because Lena was in the doorway. She had come at 7:30 as promised, and she was in her uniform, not her civilian clothes because her shift started at 8, and she would be going directly from this to her first room. And she was holding her cart slightly to the side as if she was still deciding whether this was a professional visit or something else. Maisie turned and saw her. Children have a social radar that adults gradually learn to suppress, a direct and unmediated form of attention that takes in information without the intervening layers of politeness and assessment. Maisie looked at Lena with open, uncomplicated interest. "Hi," Maisie said. "Hi," Lena said. "Are you the friend?" Maisie asked. Declan looked at Lena. Lena looked at Maisie. "What friend?" Lena said. "Daddy said there was a friend, that the picture was for a friend." Maisie pointed at the drawing in Declan's hand. "Are you her?" Lena glanced at Declan. He gave her nothing useful, just watched, which she had come to recognize as his version of giving her space to handle a thing herself. "Yes," Lena said. "I'm her." Maisie considered this with great seriousness. "He talked about you," she said. "He didn't say your name, but he said there was a friend who helped him when it was hard." "He helped me first," Lena said. "A long time ago." "When you were young?" "When we were both young." Maisie appeared to find this information satisfactory. She turned to her father. "She seems nice," she said, in the tone of someone conferring a significant rating. "She is," Declan said. "You should invite her to the house." "Maisie." "I'm just saying." She turned back to Lena. "Do you like dogs?" Lena blinked. "Yes, generally." "We're getting a dog," Maisie said. "Daddy doesn't know it's decided yet." "It's not decided," Declan said. "It's decided," Maisie told Lena, confidentially. Lena almost smiled, the almost kind, the one that was in her eyes before her mouth caught up with it. Rosa appeared again more firmly. "Car, now. The discharge paperwork is done and the nurses need the room." Maisie picked up the poster sign and looked at Lena one more time with the direct evaluating attention. "Bye," she said. "You should come to the youth center thing. Daddy's building a youth center. I'm going to help." "I heard," Lena said. "You should come," Maisie said again, as if repetition settled the matter, and then she was gone, out the door and down the hall, her sneakers loud on the linoleum, the sign bouncing above her head. Rosa followed. Declan and Lena were left in the room. The bag was by the chair. The drawing had left a small rectangle of slightly lighter paint on the wall where it had been taped. The antibiotic stand was gone, removed yesterday, and the room had already begun the institutional process of depersonalization, becoming generic again, becoming nobody's room. She's exactly what I expected, Lena said. Terrifying? Complete. She looked at him. She's complete, like a whole person already. She's been a whole person since she was about 3, he said. It's exhausting and extraordinary in equal measure. Lena looked at the rectangle on the wall. Go home, she said. He picked up the cane. He picked up the bag. He stood, carefully, the way he did everything now, with the deliberateness that the leg required and that he had started to think was not just a physical adjustment, but something more like a practice, a recalibration of the habit of moving through the world as if it would hold. He walked to the door. At the threshold, he stopped. October 15th, he said. I know the date, she said. The application takes about 4 hours if you don't rush it. There's a supplemental essay. Don't write what you think they want to read. I never do. I know. He looked at her. Write what you told me. About the follow-up appointments. About the second visit and the third one. About the pharmacy and the shift you couldn't miss. Write the mechanics of it. She was quiet for a moment. You're coaching me on an application to a board you're recused from, she said. I'm telling you what makes a good essay, he said. The specifics. That's not coaching, that's basic writing advice. It's a gray area. Most useful things are. She looked at him. The morning light was coming through the window at the angle it came through at 7:30. He knew this light, had spent 5 weeks watching it move across the floor, knew the exact way it hit the equipment stand, and the chair, and the wall where the drawing had been. You finally remembered me, she said. He looked at her across the hospital room that had been, for 5 weeks, the entire geography of his world. The parallel bars and the ceiling tiles and the faded curtain and the supply corridor and the 7:45 footsteps and the silver bracelet catching the light. You helped me remember what I was supposed to be doing, he said. She shook her head slightly. You already knew. You just needed someone to sit with you while you found it again. That's what you did, he said. In the shelter, you sat there. You sat there first, she said. He held her gaze. Then we're even. She looked at him with the expression he had learned last, the one that came after all the careful architecture had been put aside, the one that was just Lena Marlowe at 30 years old, having survived everything she had survived and standing in a hospital room on a Thursday morning, watching a person she had known for 5 weeks and for 16 years walk out of a door she had watched him fight his way back to. Go home, Declan, she said. He went. The Marlowe Opportunity Foundation opened its application portal on September 1st, 11 weeks after Declan Vale walked out of Harlow General with a cane and a bag and a daughter holding a sign covered in stickers. Julian had worked with unusual speed, driven by a combination of genuine investment in the project and the specific motivation of a man who had watched his best friend nearly lose the ability to walk and had consequently developed a new appreciation for not wasting time. The board was 6 people. 2 from the nonprofit sector, 1 housing policy expert, 1 vocational training director, 1 pediatric healthcare administrator, and 1 woman named Dr. Clara Reyes, who had spent 20 years studying economic mobility and had, when Julian called her, said yes before he finished the sentence. Declan was listed as founder. He attended board meetings. He did not vote on individual applications. The foundation received 247 applications in the first cycle. The Mid-Path Education Program, the one Lena had called the one that described her situation, received 63 applications. The Independent Review Board, working from criteria that had been built from the ground up to address structural gaps rather than surface demographics, selected 11 candidates for the first cohort. Lena Marlowe was one of them. She called Julian's office when the letter arrived. Julian, who had prepared for this call with the careful neutrality of someone operating within a governance structure, confirmed the decision had been made by the independent board. He congratulated her on behalf of the foundation. He gave her the contact information for the program coordinator. She thanked him and hung up. She sat in her kitchen, the 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her mother, the one that had $412 savings account months behind it, and looked at the letter for a long time. Her mother came in from the other room. Margaret Marlowe was 61 years old and in the monitoring phase of her cancer recovery, which meant she looked better than she had in 3 years, but still carried the particular careful quality of a body that had been through something and was not entirely sure it was finished. She saw the letter in Lena's hand. "Good news?" she said. Lena looked up. "I got the scholarship," she said, "for nursing school." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and put her hand over Lena's and held it. "Your father would have," she started. "Don't," Lena said, not harshly. "Just let it just be good news. For a minute." Her mother nodded. She held Lena's hand and they sat in the kitchen in the quiet of a Thursday morning and let the good news be exactly what it was, without backstory and without what-ifs and without the weight of everything it had taken to get there. After a while, Lena's mother said, "Who gave the scholarship?" "A foundation," Lena said. It's public money, competitive application." "And you applied and you got it?" "Yes." Her mother looked at her. Margaret Marlowe had the same eyes as her daughter, dark and direct and very hard to fool. "Is there more to the story than that?" Lena looked at the silver bracelet on her wrist. "Yes," she said, "but the rest of it is mine." Her mother understood the distinction. She had raised a daughter who knew the difference between what you share and what you keep, and she respected it. "Okay," she said, and squeezed Lena's hand once. Declan went back to work on a Monday morning, 14 days after discharge, with the cane and the modified schedule that Dr. Fenwick had agreed to under sustained negotiation. 3 hours in the office, 2 remotely, afternoons reserved for the physical therapy that Sandra was now conducting in the small gym on the second floor of his house that had previously been used primarily for storing things that didn't have anywhere better to be. The company had not fallen apart. This was simultaneously reassuring and slightly humbling. The particular experience of realizing that the thing you had believed was held together by your constant presence had in fact been held together by the 400 people who worked for you and knew what they were doing. Marcus, when Declan said this to him, was tactful enough not to point out that he had been saying so for 3 years. The foundation occupied the 3rd floor of the building, a floor that had been underutilized, used for storage and the occasional overflow meeting. Julian had overseen the renovation with the same methodical thoroughness he applied to everything. By October, it had a small staff of 8 people, a boardroom with a glass wall that looked out over the street, and a break room where someone had installed a very good coffee machine that Declan suspected Marcus had authorized because Marcus's emotional language was primarily expressed through amenity upgrades. Declan went to the 3rd floor every Tuesday. He sat in on program discussions without directing them. He asked questions. He listened to the program coordinator, a woman named Adayeze, who had come from a housing nonprofit and had opinions about everything and was frequently correct, described the practical complications of implementation with the specific structural intelligence of someone who had spent years watching good intentions fail at the point of execution. He thought about Lena talking for 22 minutes in a hospital room. He thought about the difference between knowing a problem exists and knowing where it actually lives. He kept the notepad. He still wrote things down. The youth center opened on a Saturday in late November, 6 months after the accident. It occupied a converted warehouse space in a neighborhood that had been mid-gentrification for a decade without ever completing the process. The kind of neighborhood that had a good coffee shop on one corner and a check cashing place on the next, and families who had lived there for 20 years watching both. The center had a tutoring program, a vocational exploration track for teenagers, a weekend repair workshop where people could bring broken things and learn to fix them, and a room with good lighting and secondhand musical instruments that nobody had formally organized yet, but which seemed to be organizing itself. Declan and Maisie were there at 7 in the morning for the setup. Maisie, who had been promised a meaningful role, and who interpreted meaningful role as primary authority, directed the placement of chairs with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment. She had opinions about the table arrangement and the direction the chairs should face and the location of the snack table, and she expressed all of them. Rosa stood near the door and drank coffee and said nothing because she had spent 5 years learning which of Maisie's initiatives were worth redirecting and which ones should simply be allowed to run their course. By 9:30, families had started arriving. Declan stood near the entrance and watched. He was not, for once, the most important person in the room. The program staff were running the orientation. Adeze was managing the flow with the calm command of someone who had done this before. The teenagers who had signed up for the vocational track were sitting in a loose cluster looking at their phones with the studied nonchalance of people who were interested and didn't want to show it yet. He was just a person standing near a door, watching something he had helped build function without him. It was the best he had felt since before the accident. Lena arrived at 10. She had come from a shift. He could see it in the faint tiredness she carried in her posture, the specific quality of someone who had been on their feet for 7 hours and had come directly from that to here. She was in her civilian clothes, the same dark jeans and gray shirt. No cart, no professional exterior. Just Lena. She stopped inside the entrance and looked around the space. He watched her look at it. At the tutoring tables where volunteers were setting up. At the repair workshop through the glass partition where an older man was arranging tools with the careful pride of someone who had been asked to share something he'd spent years learning. At the teenagers who were beginning, slowly, to drift from the phone staring into something that looked like tentative engagement. She looked at all of it. He walked over to her. The cane was less necessary now. Sandra had declared it optional last week, meaning he could use it if the day required a lot of standing. And today had the potential to require a lot of standing. He'd brought it. He wasn't sure he was going to need it. "What do you think?" he said. She turned. She looked at him for a moment before she answered. "I think the chair arrangement is very specific," she said. "Who did that?" "Maisie. She's got strong opinions about chairs. She's got strong opinions about everything." Lena looked back at the room. "It's good," she said. The same way she'd said it about the foundation draft. Flat, genuine, with the weight of someone who doesn't say things they don't mean. It's real. It doesn't feel like a photo opportunity. That was the goal. The repair workshop, she said. That was in the notes. The vocational exploration piece. Teaching people that things can be fixed, that skills are transferable. You said something in the hospital about the gap between what vocational programs promised and what they delivered. The mismatch between training and placement. He paused. I couldn't fix the credential piece in this room, but I could start something that teaches the underlying thing, that you can learn to fix what's broken, that's a skill with more applications than the specific object. He looked at him. That's a very large idea to put in a room with a table of screwdrivers, she said. Most large ideas live in small rooms, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I start the nursing program in January, she said. The spring cohort. The Foundations program coordinator connected me with a modified schedule that works around my shifts here until I can reduce my hours. How are you feeling about it? She considered. Terrified, she said, and ready. Both. That sounds about right. I haven't been a student in 6 years, she said. I'm going to be in classes with 24-year-olds who don't have mortgages or sick mothers or 7 years of observational experience in a hospital setting. The 24-year-olds have a different set of advantages, he said. You have yours. I know that intellectually. You'll figure out the rest when you're in the room. He paused. You're good at rooms. She gave him a look. You are, he said. That's not flattery. That's pattern recognition. You told me yourself, you know how to make people feel seen. That doesn't turn off because you're a student instead of a worker. She looked at the floor for a moment. He had learned that this was what she did when something landed in a place she hadn't defended well enough. She looked down briefly, relocated herself, and came back up level. My mother asked about you, she said. He raised his eyebrows. What did you tell her? That you were someone I knew a long time ago. She paused. And that you kept showing up. He looked at her. The morning light in the center was good. They'd worked on the lighting deliberately, warm and non-institutional, the kind that made a space feel used rather than constructed. It fell across the room and across the people beginning to fill it, and across Lena standing in the entrance with the bracelet on her wrist catching it. I kept showing up, he said. At 16, Then I moved and stopped. You came back. You came to me first. You were in a hospital, she said. That's not coming to someone. That's geography. You could have done your job professionally and said nothing, he said. You could have kept the whole thing to yourself and never asked me if I remembered you. You'd done it for 3 weeks already. She was quiet. Why did you ask? He said. She thought about it. Not the quick answer. The actual one. The kind she found after turning it over. Because you look scared, she said finally. In the bed. Waking up. You had all this. She gestured vaguely at the space between them, meaning his money and his company and his life. And you still looked exactly like a person who didn't know if they were going to be okay. And I thought. She stopped. What did you think? I thought, I know this person. She met his eyes. Not the billionaire, not the guy on the business page. The person who sat down in the rain because he saw someone who needed someone to sit with them. She paused. I thought, if there's a chance he remembers that person too, it seemed worth asking. The noise of the center was building around them. Chairs scraping, children's voices, the sound of the repair workshop's first client arriving with something in a bag, the volunteer's voice warm and welcoming. The room was becoming itself. Maisie appeared from somewhere in the middle of it, heading toward them with the purposeful momentum of a 7-year-old who has identified a destination. She arrived and looked up at Lena. You came, she said. I said I would, Lena said. Daddy said you were good at keeping your word. She considered this. I'm testing it. And? Lena said. Confirmed, Maisie said. Come look at the instruments room. Nobody's organized it yet, and it's bothering me. Lena glanced at Declan. She's going to reorganize the instruments room, he said. She's 7. She's also not wrong. It is disorganized. Lena looked at Maisie, who was waiting with the patient certainty of someone for whom the outcome was not in question. Show me, Lena said. Maisie took her hand, not asking, just taking, the way children operate when they have decided that someone belongs in their world, and pulled her into the room. Declan watched them go. He stood in the entrance of the center with his cane and the morning light and the noise of people beginning to use a space that had been built for them. And he thought about the things that had happened in the past 6 months, the accident and the hospital and the memory coming back in pieces and the infection and Sandra's parallel bars and a text message at 8:53 in the evening that said, looks like the antibiotics are working, and a photograph of 2 teenagers under a school banner and 12 items on a notepad and a conversation that had lasted 22 minutes that had changed the shape of something. He thought about what Lena had said in the hospital weeks ago, when he'd been scared and trying not to show it. You didn't change my whole life in one afternoon. You just kept coming back. He had not understood then what she was really telling him. He understood it better now. Kindness is not an event. It is not a gesture or a single afternoon or a bracelet that costs $43. It is the accumulation of small decisions made over time. The decision to sit down, to come back, to show up again when the situation is still hard, and your presence doesn't fix anything but changes the quality of it anyway. He had done it once, badly, imperfectly. As a teenager who didn't understand what he was doing, but did it anyway. He had done it badly and perfectly again. As a man in a hospital bed who couldn't walk, building something on a notepad because it was the only tool he had. He was doing it now, standing in the door of a room where his daughter was reorganizing a collection of secondhand instruments with a woman who had carried a photograph and a bracelet through 16 years of hard weather because someone had once given her those things without asking for anything in return. It was not a complete story. It was not a solved problem. His legs still did not work exactly right. Lena still had 2 semesters ahead of her and a mother in monitoring and a savings account that was not yet where it needed to be. The foundation had 236 applicants it couldn't fund this cycle. The center had a waiting list for the tutoring program. The instruments room was disorganized. These things were all true at the same time as this. 2 people who had found each other twice, in different decades and different circumstances, were standing in a room that they had both helped build, and a 7-year-old was holding the hand of one of them, and outside the window the November light was coming in. It was enough, not because it was perfect, because it was real, and it was continuing, and tomorrow there would be more of it. Declan Vale walked into the room. He left the cane by the door.